What up, comrades? Hope everyone's doing great. All right, we're going to start working our way through the Highlander TV series now that we've watched the first two movies chronologically that star Connor. The TV series stars Duncan MacLeod, who is one of the most beautiful men I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, he is on the level of Henry Cavill, easily. This dude looks so fucking hot. And I am not gay at all. But every time I see him, I'm like, damn, I gotta go to the gym. Just like chiseled out of a mountain. It's Adrian something. I don't remember exactly what his name is, but he was like a supermodel in France, I want to say, before they picked him up. So his acting chops, especially in the first season, are like not bad for being a model and not an actor. Like, not gonna lie, like they're not great. Especially when he in this first episode, he plays alongside Christopher Lambert, who is the Connor MacLeod, and Connor, you know, he is a like. He's a much better actor. And then we have this other lady, Tess, who's like the main love interest for now, I will say, without trying to spoil too much, of Duncan. And she's very pretty as well, also a model. And then we have our third model as our main character, and it's this blonde kid named Richie. Now, he's supposed to be like 16, but the actor is obviously like in his mid-20s, or maybe younger, but he does not look like he's a teenager at all. Right? So you got to kind of like, again, it's a show from the 90s. You got to kind of like close your eyes and like blur your vision a little bit and see what the show's trying to get you to do. Right? Because the whole thing is, and this gets brought up in this show, is like, okay, so Richie, who's played by like a guy in his 20s, is supposed to be like 16 years old. Duncan is supposed to be like in his mid 30s. That actually looks okay. He looks like he's late 20s, early 30s. And then Tess is supposed to be like in her 40s, I want to say, but she looks like she's easily in her late 20s. So like the actual actors. So you got to kind of like in your head, like readjust things a little bit. So the episode and the way the TV series goes, at least in the first season for the most part, we're not going to spend too much time. Probably like, it might be like 5 minutes per episode, even though they're about an hour long. They're like 52 minutes or 48 to 50 minutes. Because it was a TV show on like USA, I want to say. So there was commercials and whatnot. I think. Anyway, there are commercials, like commercial breaks and everything. Is that it's almost like a monster of the week. So every week you're going to get like Duncan doing some stuff with Tess and Richie eventually. And then there's going to be like an immortal to kill. So he kills a lot of fucking immortals because there's 6 seasons of this. And most of them, if not all of them, are 24 episodes. So in the first episode, let's see, is there anything else you really need to know? No, so that's the main cast. We get introduced to Duncan right at the beginning of the show as it opens up, because he literally has like, I am Duncan MacLeod. I was born in the year like 16 whatever, or I was born 400 years ago in the Highlands of Scotland, and I am immortal, right? It's just like a text scroll with him saying it very poorly over the top of it. And then we go right into him banging Tessa, and we get this like prolonged sex scene, which is juxtaposed in the traditional Highlander manner with Richie, or this quote-unquote 16-year-old boy breaking into his of course he has an antique shop, and his antique shop to steal stuff. And then at some point, while fucking his girlfriend Tessa, Duncan stops and he's like, I feel something, and she's like, haha. I hope you do. And I'm not gonna lie, the writing on the show is excellent. Even the delivery is like not the best to start. And he's like, no, and he like pushes her aside. And then he goes out with his like immaculate 6-pack and rippling muscle chest and beautiful chiseled chin and his like fucking ponytail. Oh man, whew, I'm getting the vapors. And he rolls out with his sword. And he sees Richie holding his sword because he was like stealing stuff. And he's holding it. He's like, holy shit, man! I'm sorry. I don't know. I'm a crook. Please don't kill me. And then Tess comes out and she's like, what's going on? He's just a boy. What's happening? And then he's like, that's not him. And then this motherfucker like falls through the skylight, and he's wearing like a trench coat, obviously. And he's got like this funny mask on. And he's like, hello, MacLeod, I'm here. There could be only one. And then they're about to fight. And then Connor like saunters into the scene. And he's like, oh, I'm Connor MacLeod. He's like, the fuck are you? And he's like, I'm here to fight you. And Duncan's like, what are you doing here? And he's like, I'm going to fight this guy. The guy's like, no, I'm here for that guy. And he's like, no, you're going to fight me. And he's like, well, the rules say you can't do 2-on-1. And he's like, you're right. And he like pushes Duncan back, and they fight a little bit. And then there's like, and then the guy is like, oh, I'm not here to fight you. I want to fight that guy or something. And then there's like a siren. And so the guy, I can't remember, it's like Slan or something. He like breaks a window very slowly. Like there's like slow motion window breaking. And then he leaps out, and then Connor and Duncan like laugh at each other, and then Connor like takes off as well. All right, so the next day at the police station, Richie's being like held, and then Duncan's there to like press or not press charges, and he's like, and the police officer's like, man, you got this guy dead to rights, blah blah blah, cameras, blah blah blah, his hand fingerprints, yada yada. He's like, let me just talk to him. So he goes in there and he's like, hey, motherfucker, you're not going to say shit about what happened last night, and then I'm not going to press charges, and I'm going to let you go. How does that sound? And then Richie's like, okay, deal. And so he's like, good. Okay. So then we get back to, then we get a scene of Tessa showering behind one of those like those glass brick showers. I don't know how to describe it, but you can see boob. You just can't see like the complete boob, right? Because it's a show in the 90s, so, and it's on USA, so you can kind of show stuff. There are other shows at the time that were like this, were like Baywatch and Silk Stockings, and there's some other stuff that were like, they're really pushing the boundaries of like what the Christian crazy people were like allowing on TV at the time. Anyway, so where were we? Okay, so we get that, and then we get like we get some pillow talk with like Duncan and Tessa drinking wine, and she's just wearing like a towel essentially, or like she's wearing like one of his shirts, like button ups. It's like barely buttoned up, and then they're like flirting and talking about it's her birthday, and he bought her like a tennis bracelet, which is like a diamond bracelet for those of you who are uncultured. And I don't know why they call it a tennis bracelet. Don't ask me. Ask ChatGPT. And, you know, she's like upset because now she's older than him, and, you know, they've been together for like 20 years, which, like I said, she's supposed to be like in her 40s, and he's like 35. So they jaw-jack about that, about being immortal, about him leaving her or her leaving him to be grow old with somebody, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, the next day she's like walking to work. She works at she has like there's the antique shop where they kind of like live, and then there's like, she has like a workshop somewhere where she does like art stuff, but I don't know what the art stuff is in this. We don't really get a view of it, except that she's welding things. So she's doing some modernistic like metalworking art of some sort. Anyway, Slan is like watching her, and then Duncan, let's see, what happens? Oh, and then, you know, we get a couple shots of, then we get like a montage of Duncan and Connor like hanging out and like sword fighting and practicing and whatnot, and Richie's like watching them from a distance. Anyway, after that, we get Duncan goes back to his place, or to Tessa's place, like the studio, and Slan's there, and he's like threatening her. He's like got her tied up, and he threatens her, and they're about to fight, and he's like, no, I just want to put the fear of God in you. And they call me Slan the cat or something, because I like to play with my food, like whatever bullshit. And then he like leaves, and then we get Duncan and Connor talking about Tessa and Connor and Duncan talking about being together, and you know how he wants her to go, or she wants to go, but she wants him to go with her. And then Connor like comes over and is cooking him food and talking about like the gathering, and they're like, she knows a little bit about the fact that Duncan's like immortal and stuff, but she doesn't know the rules. She's about sacred ground and all that stuff. So we kind of get like a refresher from what Ramirez was telling us in the first movie, or telling Connor, so that we'd understand. So they have a little jaw-jack about that. And then there's like some more sword fighting. Oh, no. Yeah, there's some more sword fighting practice because Slan beat up Duncan but didn't like do anything because he likes to play with his food or some bullshit. Anyway, let's see. We get... Oh, okay. And then Connor and Duncan are like chit-chatting, and Tessa... Or they come back from like their second sword fighting experience. Oh, yeah, and a couple times we see the past with Duncan. He's just like somewhere with a bunch of dead people after like a war. Like it's like a Native American thing, and he's like done with the whole immortal bullshit and done with people killing each other. So he got permission from like the village elders or like tribal council or whatever to build on some of their sacred ground, like a cabin. And so he just like is chilling there, and then he has a conversation with Connor. This is like hundreds of years ago, and he's like, I'm not gonna fight anymore. And it's like, you can't get away forever. And he's like, not forever. I'm just like, I'm done for now. I need a break. And he's like, okay, which is important and excellent writing because it comes up again at the end. Anyway, so then after they do their second sword fighting and is like reminiscing about all that stuff, Tessa, they get back, and Tessa's like, Slan has a note. He came and threatened me and gave me a note for you to meet him at this place at midnight or whatever to fight. And then Duncan's like sharpening his swords, and Connor and him are like jaw-jacking and like getting angry at each other about some bullshit. And then Duncan like turns around, and then Connor like knocks him out, and he's like, take care of your man. And then he goes out to fight this guy. So then Richie's like hiding in Connor's car in like the trunk. So they get to like this bridge, like the Brooklyn Bridge or something, that they're gonna fight on. And then Slan and Connor, they fight for a while, and then it looks like Connor's about to get him, but then Slan has like a shotgun or something in like the hilt of his sword. And so he blasts Connor right in the chest, and he falls off the bridge into the water. Like, the fuck? And right as he does that, like, meanwhile, Duncan had like woken up. Tessa told him about it. He like raced over here, to fight him, and so he shows up right when it's like time to switch over. So then they fight, and then Duncan overcomes him and like cuts his head off, and it's like there could be only one. And then Richie's like watching this whole thing and all the lightning and all that good stuff. And then they look at each other, and Richie's like, oh man, oh shit, bro. And then Duncan just like shakes his head and like jumps off the bridge. And then we get a shot later where he's like pulled Connor out of the water because he was like hurting pretty good, and he's like, oh, I got some good news for you, you're gonna be alive, or I got a surprise, no surprise to you, you're gonna be fine. And then they talk about what he's gonna do next, and Duncan's like, I'm gonna go, I don't want to put Tessa in trouble. And then they talk a little bit about that, and then we go back to Tessa, and she hears the door open, and she runs over, and it's Connor. Wah wah wah. And she's like, where did he go? And he's like, he wouldn't tell me. And she's like, but you know. And he's like, I think I know. And so then he takes her to that cabin that he made in the sacred ground on the Indian like land or whatever in like upstate New York or whatever. And then she's like, I love you, I want to be with you until you die or whatever. And then, you know, he's looking so hot. But and they like hug it out, and then Connor's like, all right, deuces. And he leaves. And he doesn't say deuces, that's the thing. It's just like, I'll see you around. And then he walks off, and then she's like, he didn't say goodbye. And then Duncan's like, well, we never do. And that's the end of the episode. Da da da. So for episode 2, we concentrate a lot on Richie Ryan. He's the 16, quote unquote 16-year-old boy that McLeod has kind of like semi-adopted. He's working for him and living at the antique store at this point. I don't know if they really broached that too much at the end of the last episode. I think they did. I don't know if I talked about it. But yeah, so he gets arrested again because he tries to go to an orphanage and steal some paperwork because apparently it's illegal for him to get paperwork from an orphanage about himself because he's an orphan. And he's trying to discover his past. So the whole episode is just focused around that. So as part of that, we got this kind of like side story that in there that kind of interweaves itself about this guy, Joe Blow or something, who works at a casino. And apparently the lady who runs the casino, like the illegal casino in New York, is upset because some guy came in and won like $50,000 and they think like he's involved. So he has to pay back the $50,000 because the guy like disappeared. So her like guy who does like the manhandling, like the loan sharkery, kind of breaking fingers and stuff, can't track this guy down because he like disappeared. It's like kind of implied that he might be like one of these immortal guys, like the dude from the last episode. But anyway, so Duncan, so then at some point Richie and Duncan like they track like, okay, so Richie remembers like his mom died and that they used to go to like this candy store next to a post office. They run around all day, and there's like a montage of him like talking to post office workers and like running around New York. And then they find the guy who ran the candy store, and he's retired and whatnot, but he remembers Richie and his mom, and then he mentions that the parents were separated, but that he thinks the dad used to live in like this old hotel that is like kind of like a cheap apartment at this point. And so Richie heads over there and he talks to the guy, and it's the same guy who is the gambling guy. And so he gives him his number and says, hey, if you run into like Jack Ryan, I think is his name, have him give me a call or whatever. So at that juncture, the guy, you know, the bouncer guy for the gambling lady comes over and he's like, aha, you had 5 days to get this money and it's day 2, time to break more fingers. And so the guy's like, no, I'm that kid out there, I'm going to get him to get me money, don't worry about it. And so then he goes and pretends to be Richie's dad, and he's fooled him and he fools Tessa, and Duncan's like, I don't think so, that's some old bullshit. And we get some like, so in all these episodes, they go back in time a little bit so we can see stuff from the past, from Duncan's past, and we go and see that he had a whole issue with his father as well. And so his deal is that, so he was like, you know, a member of Clan MacLeod, and he was like high up. He was like the prince essentially, and his dad was like the chieftain or whatever. And then when he became immortal, just like Connor, he got like cast out. And then at some point, he like tracks his dad down. This is all in the past. And like confronts him again, and his dad's like, you're not my son. He's like, no, I am your son just because blah blah blah. And he's like, no, you're literally not my son. What happened was my wife had a boy and he was stillbirth, and then the midwife was like, oh, someone else like had a kid at the same time and she died. So he's like, all right, I'm gonna take this kid and I'm gonna banish the midwife out to the locks or whatever. So fuck her and and raise him as my own. And then Duncan's like, then who am I? And then his like foster or adopted dad like just rides off, and that's it. And so Duncan's like, damn. And so he tells the story to Richie because at some point the guy is like, you know, he's trying to hide out from the gangster lady with the casino and whatnot. And so Richie gets him to come over to like the antique store, then he steals something, and then he's going to use that to like catch a plane to get like the fuck out of here. But then Richie gets like grabbed by like the thug, because Richie's, even though he's like a 27-year-old man, he's supposed to be like a 16-year-old boy. And so he gets grabbed up, and the guy sees it and he feels bad because Richie's like a good kid and all that. And so he goes to take the mask to trade, and then there's they're gonna beat him up and Richie up or something. They're gonna there's a whole bunch of nonsense about that. And so Duncan shows up at the last minute and just beats the shit out of everybody. And then Richie gets the old man, who's not his dad, on a bus to Tucson so he can start his life over. And then they have a conversation. And then Duncan reveals that he never knew who his family was. And he tells Richie hey, it sucks that you don't know your parents, but at the same time, this lets you be whoever you want. You don't have to be confined by the past or whatever, which is a nice little tale. Which is true. Even if you do know your parents, you shouldn't be confined by your past. You make your own life going forward, right? You can learn the lessons from the past and whatnot. And then they have a nice little moment, a whole episode while they're working on a car, and at the end the car's working and Richie's revving it up and laughing, and so that's a cute episode. Dun, dun. Hey comrades, so episode 3, we're back to focusing on Duncan and immortal shit. So it starts off in this delivery boy goes into this store or bank or something and takes a prisoner and bashes through a wall and just looks completely doped up or whatever, and then he drags the hostage outside and then has an aneurysm and dies, right? So this guy's name is Gary, and Gary is a close old friend. He's an old friend of Richie. So Richie takes Duncan. Oh, before this, Richie does this. So Tess is heading off to, I can't remember where, somewhere in Europe, I think, to do an exhibit or to show off some of her art shit that she does and whatnot. So it's just Duncan and Richie. So after she takes off, Duncan heads inside and Richie gives him a look. They go to the hospital. They find out from our old police buddy who keeps arresting Richie that the guy died, and they think it's a drug overdose, but they go, for some reason they're allowed to go look at him, and Duncan mentions there's a cardiac, some sort of what does he call it? It's not an aneurysm. He calls it some sort of brain, a seizure or something. God, he calls it something. Fuck, I can't remember. A cerebral hemorrhage, I think is what he says. Anyway, and the guy's no, it's probably drugs. And it's how would you know that? And then we go back in time to 1680 or something, and we meet this Chinese immortal Kim Soom, which sounds more Korean than Chinese, to be completely honest. But anyway, and he's hiding out in sacred ground, and he's been working on this drug to perfect men or give them strength and not need to sleep and all this stuff. He's working on cocaine, and then anyway, and so that he shows to Duncan. Duncan gets really upset because it's there's mind-inducing powers to it. He makes him kind of subservient to this guy. And Duncan's upset because it's against the code or the quickening or just leave mortals alone and stuff. Anyway, this guy's been working on it for 100 years and it still hasn't perfected it because these guys die immediately afterwards, and they have this cerebral hemorrhage as well right above their temples or whatever, just like Gary does. And so back to the present. Him and Duncan and Richie have a conversation about Duncan thinks it's an immortal thing. We know it's probably related to this guy, and he's going to go check some stuff out. And so then he heads off to the hospital, meets up with the detective. It is a cerebral hemorrhage that caused the problem, and they found some Chinese medicine stuff. So it's obviously this Kim Soom guy. So he goes off to find him. Meanwhile, Richie, who was told very specifically by Duncan to stay home, doesn't stay home because he's 16. And so he goes off and he's asking around and doing all this stuff. And then we bump into, he gets beat up by some guy who he's harassing about trying to get information. And then we find Angie. Angie is Richie's girlfriend. Not really girlfriend yet, but it's his love interest for I think the first 2 seasons, if I remember correctly. Maybe not the first 3. Anyway, she's cool. She's a cute girl. And so he's flirting with her. She works a homeless shelter in the bad part of town. They talk about Gary, talk about how he stayed clean. There was no way he was doing drugs and stuff. And so then the name, this name comes up. It's God, what the fuck was it? It was Twin Chong or something like that. And so he tracks down this. Meanwhile, we see the guy that everyone's looking for. Not the ancient immortal, but this other guy that was. He was also at the scene of the crime when Gary died. Anyway, he's at the bar. He's at a bar, and these guys accost him because what'd you do with Gary? He was in a motorcycle gang or some bullshit, and he beats him up, and he's I need some people to help me with a heist, and they're okay, sure, why not? You beat us up, we'll do that. Okay. It's jeez. Meanwhile, Duncan goes and finds Kim Soom again. He is in like another sacred ground area, just doing his thing. He walks in, they like chit chat. This guy, the guy responsible for Gary's like death, is his like assistant. He grabs some of like the potion that he's still working on like 300 years later, and it's still not perfected. And he's, they go back and forth. They have a lot of arguments about the use of it and like how it's not what he's wasting his time and all this stuff. And then they have like a little play sword fight, and the Chinese guy is like really bad at sword fighting, and Duncan gives him a hard time. Because he's like, hey, man, you got to get out of sacred ground. Eventually, you're going to have to come out and fight your own battles in the quickening. And he's like, yeah, whatever. And they talk about like some vow Duncan made where he's like going to protect him until he crosses the line because he's busy trying to like do things to help mankind. Anyway, so then we find the Richie and Angie go out and about, and they figure out where the assistant is. And then we head to the assistant, and he's in some like just random fucking warehouse with like the goons that he purchased, and they're getting ready to like rob like a safe, and he's going to give him some like magic tea, which the magic tea has like the drug and whatnot. And so they all drink it, right? But then like they just like run off. So like, okay, I guess they're all dead. What you gonna do? Anyway, and right around that point, Richie and Angie show up, and then Richie tries to fight the guy, but he just like gets beat up. This guy's not immortal, by the way. The assistant is not an immortal. Anyway, he's about to kill him, and then Kim Soon rolls in, and he's like, "Hey, assistant, stop!" And he's like, "Oh, old man, blah 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 blah." And then they yell, and then the guy like makes a run for it, and then Duncan shows up, and then Kim Soon's like, "This is my fight," and Duncan's like, "No, it's my fight now." And then he fights this guy, and then behind him, Kim Soon's just like watching and like holding his sword, and then he comes up to like strike Duncan from like behind, like an asshole, right? Because he's actually really good at fighting, and he trained this guy to fight with the sword, and he's like he was pretending to be really bad earlier, and so he kills his assistant because Duncan like jumps out of the way, and then Duncan and him fight. And Duncan almost kills him. Like he gets to a point where he like cut off his head, and he said, "Not today, motherfucker." But he's like, "Next time." And then they like argue, and then the guy like reveals finally that he wants to work on the potion because he wants to use it to enslave men to help him with the quickening. And Duncan's like, "That's not how it fucking works, motherfucker. Like it's not gonna happen. That's not how this thing works. That's not how the gathering works. You better quit your shit and like figure it out." And then he says, "Next time," like, "Hey, earlier when I said like, hey, I'm going to protect you till you cross the line, you fucking cross the line. So next time I see you, you're dead." Right? And so that's kind of sad. And then they part. Then we get like a cute little ending scene with Richie showing Angie around like the museum, the antique store that they work at, and then they end the tour in Duncan and Tessa's like bedroom, and then he's like, "Hey," and she's like, "Oh yeah, is this what you're thinking?" And she's like, "Well, I better get going, tee hee hee," because it's like the 80s, and he's like, "Well, maybe I'll come hang out with you sometime. We can do something else." And then he gives her like a little smooch, and right as he's like giving her a little smoochy, and she's loving it, by the way, Duncan and Tessa like walk into the bedroom, and they're like, "Hello." "Why are you in our bedroom?" And they're like, tour? Oh, good stuff. And then they kind of skitter off, and then Duncan and Tessa get ready to fuck. And that ends the episode. Episode 4 takes Duncan and Tessa out to visit a friend of his, Lucas, in the boondocks? Or the sticks, or whatever they call them. I thought they were in New York, but I'm trying to think they're like in Los Angeles, because it seems like they go to like Tahoe? Like they're in some like mountain town. They could just be in like New Orleans. Like anyway. So they're headed out there, and then we see this like bum, and he's being harassed by teenagers, and then he sees he hears some noises, so he goes out to this cabin, and then he sees like dun dun dun. Lucas, who's an immortal friend of Duncan, is killed by another immortal, obviously. And so the Duncan and Tessa, as they're like walking up, he like collapses, and he's like, "Oh, Lucas is dead." And the homeless guy, I don't think I ever caught his name. He walks in, he sees the body, he picks up like this like Civil Era like rapier style sword, and then this like shady local sheriff like rolls in. So he's obviously the other immortal. Okay, so we go back to every town. Like it might as well be fucking Gotham City. So we go back to Immortal Town, wherever Duncan's from, and he's talking to Tessa about the whole situation. He's going to go investigate a little bit, and Richie's going to go with him. So Richie and Duncan head out to this area. Richie gets like arrested on purpose. Like he like very obviously tries to like break into like a cop car, so he gets put in like the local prison or whatever. And then Duncan gets him out, and while they're like processing the paperwork to get Richie out, Duncan is chatting with Leo, that's his name, the veteran guy, and they're kind of talking about how he didn't do it. He got there, something. He's innocent. And then Duncan's like, "I'll take care of you. Don't worry about it." Meanwhile, before this kind of like went on, our old friend, detective guy, we get a lot more of him. He's like the old grizzled black detective from Gotham City, or whatever the fuck like the main town is, Los Angeles. Would be the most likely thing. And he gets the sheriff from like the sticks comes and gets him because he also had a case where someone lost their head, and they're talking about that, and he's trying to get information. There's no information, but he goes back to help interrogate, and they have this like very like intense like shady interrogation. Also, we get introduced to like sexy news lady who's harassing Tessa about like a recent like the head beheading that happened on the bridge, right, from like the first episode, but also like, is that related to the beheading over here, and does she know anything because her store was broken into around the same time, and she sells swords. Anyway, so she's a very inquisitive like kind of 90s era like investigative journalist who's trying to like, you know, get her scoop or whatever. And she's important for later in this episode, so that's important that gets introduced. Okay, so then Duncan and Richie, they meet some of the locals, and they're just a whole bunch of assholes. And then at some point, the detective from Gotham, the black detective, he realizes that this guy's innocent, and we learn that he served in Vietnam, and this guy, the homeless guy, is like a Vietnam vet too, with the Purple Heart and everything. But he was in like the 82nd Airborne, motherfuckers. Anyway, so I was like, booyah, hell yeah, right. All American for life. Anyway, so shit. So he's like, no, I'm gonna take him back for like psychiatric evaluation, and I'm pulling custody on this guy, and I'm like, how? You're in completely different jurisdictions. The fuck are you? You can just take this prisoner from like a totally different like county, it seems, and drag him out there. The sheriff's like, right, because the sheriff's at county level, and this guy's like a police detective in like a major city. So okay, sure. I guess you got a warrant. What? Okay, whatever. It doesn't matter. What matters is that so he's gonna go, and then like the Gotham detective is like super like sketched out by like the Boonies detective, the immortal guy. And at some point, Duncan and Richie are like leaving this like diner they've been hanging out with for like half the episode, and they get accosted by a bunch of locals. And then the sheriff comes up, and then Duncan and him immediately know that they're immortals because they have like the sense, right? They're like, ooh. And so then they like jaw jack, and then the sheriff tells them that like the Vietnam homeless guy, the suspect, is being taken somewhere else for a psychiatric evaluation, and they obviously go to like, you know, what is it called, like rural justice or whatever. And then they're like, and then the sheriff's like, well, I'll catch you later. And so then Duncan gets Richie to go accost the journalist lady who's there trying to get a scoop, and essentially is like, oh hey, so they're moving that guy, and like maybe we could follow him and you could get a scoop. And she's like, oh, I love that idea. So he hops in the van with her, and then Duncan follows, and then we have a standoff because the guy who is supposed to be escorting Leo to like the Gotham City, and the police detective who went with them just to make sure nothing shady happened, they get accosted by the locals who are all wearing like burlap sacks, like fucking Resident Evil 4 Chainman guy, and they got shotguns and shit. And so the detective, who is balls out, man, he just like pops out with his like his little pea shooter and is like, you guys better back the fuck up. And I was like, airborne, motherfuckers. Anyway, where was I? Oh, and then Duncan, who's like a fucking ninja, like somehow like drives around this whole thing and like starts like taking fucking dudes out behind their back, and then he like rolls on up, and he just tells like the guy who's like in the front, and the news anchor lady's like filming this whole thing. She rolls up, she starts filming it, and then these guys are like, you better put your fucking camera away, something with their like burlap sack, looking ridiculous nonsense. And then Duncan just like rolls up, and he's like, what do you do, motherfucker? Shoot me, shoot that kid, shoot that woman, get the fuck out of here. And they're like, okay. And so they just like all roll out, and then Duncan grabs Richie, and they like dodge the fuck out of there. And then the news lady starts trying to interview the detective again, and finally he like tells him what's going on, and he's gonna put like a police or an FBI. He's gonna put him like for an FBI investigation because clearly law enforcement is like helping out with like these locals trying to like rural justice this whole situation. Anyway, so it's like later on back in Gotham the blah 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 blah. Oh, the police detective's like hanging out with Duncan in his like artifact shop, and Richie, and they're just like chit chatting, and they might interview him, they may ask him some questions about how they got involved in this whole thing. And so before that all happens, we go and have our fucking awesome sword battle between the sheriff and Duncan. Duncan kills him and cuts his head off, and they're gonna be the only one and all that shit, which is fucking radical. And then he like buries his friend as well, who was just like, I guess, I don't know, laying out there in the woods. He dug a grave for. We saw it. He's like, here's the grave. Good night, buddy. Oh, and throughout the episode, we get a couple of back shots of Lucas. He seems like a really stand-up guy. I mean, he was like a Confederate officer, and Duncan was being hung because he was like a Union officer, and he got caught by the Confeds, and so they hung him, and then Lucas came along and like rescued him, and they like chit chat, and I get they probably had like more adventures as well, because it's like, why would they still be friends like 200 years later? Anyway, so that was fun. Oh, and then the homeless guy comes in. He's like, "Hey, man, they're gonna like put him on a bus and send him somewhere else, so he can be like safe." And then the guy's like, "Oh, hey, do you mind? I have this like old medal. How much can I get for it?" Right? And then Duncan, it's like a Purple Heart. And he's like, "You were in this?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, and he gives him like, it looks like he gives him like over $1,000, which is a lot in like 80s money. And he, because he gives him like a whole bunch of hundreds, and then he like, it's like, okay, cool. If you ever want this, I'll hold it on consignment. Consignment's like where you go to a pawn shop and they give you like a loan essentially, and then if you ever come back and pay for it, you get the shit. But if not, they'll like sell it to make up the money, and they don't give you what it's worth. And then the guy's like, wow, that thing's worth a lot more than I thought it was. And then Duncan like puts the Purple Heart back in his backpack when he's like walking off, because obviously Duncan is like a stellar human being. And then everyone's like, all right, high fives all around. So episode 5 picks up. We got this crazy looking lady, and I don't mean crazy as in like she looks like she's crazy. She just looks like she's confused and lost or whatever. She's stumbling around. There's like this sketchy car following her. And then she stumbles into the antique shop where Richie is working by himself. She's like cut up her hand, and clearly like from the get-go, you're pretty sure this is like an immortal chick. But she puts on a good show. And Richie tries to help her, and then she disappears. She goes to like this tall building, takes her clothes off, and then leaps to her death, quote unquote. And so then the police commissioner, who's not a gentleman I remember seeing before, this is not the normal like black guy, airborne, and all that shit that we've had in the previous episodes. It's like a new guy or whatever. Anyway, the lady had like a business card that Richie gave her before he left, and that's the only thing that was like on her body when they found her dead. So they take her to the morgue. Or sorry, they take Richie, the commissioner takes Richie and Duncan to the morgue, and dun-da-da, she's gone! Of course she's gone. And then we see this guy with like long hair and like a mustache or whatever, who's the guy who's been in the car who was following her around. And he comes into the morgue after everyone leaves and like beats up the coroner for some reason and sees that she's not there and gets like really mad. So then later on, the lady shows back up at the antique store, and she's got like her wound in her body, and she's like, oh no. And Richie's like, oh, we have to help her. And then Tessa gets like concerned, and then McLeod comes in, and he's like, he senses the mortal, and he's like, get the fuck out. So he goes in there to like kill her, but then she's like, what's going on? I don't understand. And then McLeod's like, well, maybe I won't kill her yet. I gotta figure out what's going on. So he doesn't. So he promises that he'll teach her and talks to her about being an immortal and shit. And then we go to like the guy, he's like living in an apartment somewhere, and he's got like a sweet ass like lute, violin looking thing. And then he's the one having like back dreams. And so what we find out is that at this point that this lady's a bullshitter. She says something about before that happens, she says something about like some map he has being a forgery, and that the reason she knows it's a forgery is because she's the one who made it. And then Duncan's like, he's like very intrigued by this whole situation, and he's like, I'm usually not fooled by shit because I'm like 500 years old, but anyway, so he starts training her, and then we get this montage, or no, then we get the guy, he has like a recollection, and we find out that dun-da-da, she's been an immortal for at least like 200 years, and what she did is she tracked this dude down, and her like Black Widow-ness is that she finds like immortals, kills their like partners or their people they love to enrage them so that she can beat them later. And so she like drowned this guy's like wife, and then their like adopted child, and it was like, that's fucked up. Like, right, so this guy's been tracking her down for like 200 years or whatnot. So he comes to the antique shop looking around to find her at some point, but she's off training with McLeod or buying clothes or something, and so he beats up Richie, and he drops like his wallet. And then when Duncan and Tessa and Felicia, the pretend new immortal, show back up, they're like, no one notices this wallet's on the ground except Felicia after everyone kind of like leaves the room for whatever reason. And so she picks it up and she finds like this guy has like his address in his wallet, which is like a thing people used to do. So then she goes in like the middle of the night in like this punk rock outfit that she uses to like kill people, I guess, to like hide her identity or something. And she fights the guy and she beats him and kills him. And they're gonna be the only one. And she absorbs his power and whatnot. So we get a couple more we get another like little training montage with her and McCloud. And then she keeps trying to like fuck Richie, and eventually she gets the opportunity, so she does, which tricks him, which mind fucks him because he's like 16, or I guess I guess he's supposed to be 18. And so later on, when Duncan is like, after a training thing, he's like, hey, I gotta go take care of something. So he goes to take care of that. And what he's trying to figure out is if the map that she mentioned earlier is actually a forgery. And then Tessa's like off doing her like art shit with like the welder and her like metal art shit, statue stuff. And so then the lady comes in and is like, oh, Richie, I love you. Run away with me and we'll be together forever until you grow old, and I love you so much. And Richie's like, I'm horny as shit. Sure, let's do that. He even has a conversation early in the episode. This show is so well written. They have a whole conversation, him and Tessa, about how horny he is for getting his dick wet or whatever. So finally he did. Heck yeah. And then, yeah. Anyway, so don't worry, everybody. He's 18 apparently. I thought he was 16. My bad. So then she's like, go to my apartment. I got some money from like the forgeries I was doing. And under the floorboards, there'll be some money, and they meet me at like this beach. So clearly they're on the coast somewhere. And so he goes off to do that, and then she like locks the door and then goes in to like kill Tessa because that's how she operates. And then Tessa's like, what the fuck are you doing here? And she's like, I'm here to kill you because that's how I operate. And then she's like, I knew it! Because I have a thing, I know about women. And so then she pulls out like her welding torch while the lady pulls out like a sword, and she's like, if you can get me, but I'm going to fuck you up. I'm going to fuck your face up, and then you won't be beautiful anymore. And the lady's like, I don't want to do that. Tell McCloud he better meet me at this beach at this time. They're like, why would he go fight? Why would he go there? Do that? And she's like, oh, he better. He's going to be saying goodbye to Richie. And then, so Duncan, he's at the antique. He's like a different antique store or like at a forger guy. And the guy's like, yeah, this is a forgery, but I definitely can understand why you'd think be fooled by it. It's like a 200-year-old forgery. And then McCloud's like, fuck. So then Richie's at the beach, and she's about to, like, kill him. And she's, like, taunting him and stuff in her, like, punk rock outfit. And then McCloud shows up, and then we get, like, this ridiculous fight. And I say ridiculous because it goes on for, like, way longer than these fights normally do. And, like, these people are not, like, sword fighters, and there's not, like, a lot of stuff. They just, like, they like, sepia color. Or, no, they do, like, a grayscale. And then they play this, like, funny song. And then eventually he like gets her, and he's about to cut her head off, and then Richie stops her, and so he just stabs her and is like, I better not see you again anytime soon. And she's like, oh, you'll see me again. And then she like passes out from blood loss or whatever, because mortals can like quote unquote die, and then they recover. So, and then Richie's like, I'm sorry. And there's a whole thing too where he buys like a $200,000 like sword from like the ancient Japanese craftsman like Matsumoto or whatever. And I was having a hard time to see if he like maybe broke it, but then he like knocks it out. He at least disarms her, and then he like storms off in the other direction. And then Richie walks. He's like apologizes, and then Richie like walks towards where the sword would be. So I'm assuming he just went and picked it up. Because why would you leave a $200,000 sword, even if it's partially broken, like out in like a beach for like a child to pick up like this fucking sword? Anyway, and that's the episode. So it was good stuff. So apparently Tessa loves parking illegally. She's got like a whole ream full of parking tickets. Crazy foreigner. Yeah, she's got some sort of accent, so she's not American of some sort. I think she's French. I don't know. Anyway, and so we start off the episode, and the crew, Duncan, Richie, and Tessa are headed to the courthouse so she can pay off all her fucking like $500,000 worth of parking tickets. And they even get a parking ticket on their way out, which is hilarious. So Duncan takes them. Richie and Tessa head on in. And then Duncan like takes a nap, and he's parked illegally while doing this. So it's like a running gag in this episode. He gets like 2 more parking tickets while parked there. Anyway, so inside we get like some various characters. We get a guy who brings his daughter to work day, and he's like a janitor or something. And so at the courthouse, and he like leaves her in like he has like a closet for her. That she like with a play area and stuff, and like one of his janitorial closets, so she just hangs out in there and like plays and stuff, and then he comes back periodically to check on her and whatnot. Anyway, also what's going on is there's a trial, like a closed trial for some like murderer, he's getting life without parole. He killed like 7 people, including possibly a cop, it seems. And then there's and then we meet this like lawyer guy who's kind of shisty, and then the judge. Oh, and then at the same time we get like a shot of these guys who are clearly nefarious, who are like going into they're like in overalls. They're gonna go like paint a hallway or something, but because the show's written well, we obviously they are related somehow. Okay, so what ends up happening is when the bailiff or whatever is taking the guy off to after the sentencing, he gets jumped along with like the other cop that's with him. By these painter guys who are just like shooting up the place, and they grab everybody. And then Richie, Tessa, this old man Richie knows, the janitor guy, Duncan hears like shooting, so he runs inside, and then he knocks one guy out, but then he gets hit from behind. And then the lawyer, they all get grabbed up, taken back to the courthouse, like the courtroom where they're being held hostage. And then the whole building like clears out. The police show up. We got police commissioner from the previous episode. He's here doing like hostage negotiations, and he calls himself a lieutenant. So I don't know if Duncan was just calling him commissioner to like tease him, because a lieutenant is not a commissioner. Those are different ranks. Anyway, so okie dokie. And so then this episode becomes like a hostage negotiation between like the fat old commissioner guy and the swarmy like serial murderer, and then Duncan and Tessa and then Richie has like this connection with some rando who's there who's having like heart problems or something, and that's like kind of a storyline that's very short and succinct and doesn't really go anywhere. There's a little girl. Duncan has to go rescue her at some point. Oh, okay, so then Duncan wakes up. Him and like the serial murderer have a conversation about how he used to be a soldier, like Duncan used to be a soldier, and this guy did also, I guess. And there's some other kind of conversations about like this crew that is trying to help the murderer out. They have like military training of some sort, but then one guy seems like he's like 70 years old and, and he's like super sweaty. So okay, sure, why not? You get the extras you can afford, right? Anywho, so where do we go from here? Oh, okay. So then the episode pretty quickly, Duncan, like they're like, okay, you guys brought snipers on a helicopter. We just wanted to get out of here, so we're gonna kill a hostage, and they're gonna like drag off the lawyer to kill him. And then Duncan's like, take me instead. Essentially, it's like, all right, we'll go kill that guy instead. And then they take the lawyer off anyway, and we don't see him anymore. So I don't know if he was just like too much to afford to keep in this episode any longer or something. Anyway, so Duncan goes off. They put him on like they have like one CCTV camera left that they haven't destroyed on like the 4th floor wherever they're holding the hostages. And so they shoot him, and everyone's like, oh no, and then they destroy the camera. And then our friend, the journalist lady, is there doing investigative journalism stuff. And again, this seems like it's more important, because now it's like, instead of just being like Angie in one episode, or like, you know, whatever, it's like, oh, this chick is now in like multiple episodes kind of in a row almost. Like, well, I mean, not in the last episode, but she's like around doing stuff. And at some point she sees Duncan like, oh, well, we'll get there. Okay. So then now that Duncan is immortal, and he wakes up, and then he starts pulling like a solid snake, and he just sneaks around the building and like subdues every one of these guys. It looks like he kills some of them, but some of them he doesn't. He just like chokes him out or whatever. And then the serial guy, the killer guy, and like his number one are starting to get super concerned because dudes are disappearing or missing, and he's like moving around. He's starting to really freak out, and he keeps calling the police officers. I was like, dude, we haven't done anything. Like, I don't know what's going on in there. And then Richie starts talking about how there's some serial murderer in like a different courtroom at the same time. He probably like snuck out, and he's probably killing everybody, and he's gonna like eat them because he's a cannibal and whatnot. And then Duncan finds the little girl, and then takes her, cause she's got to go use the bathroom. So he takes her there, and then he takes her to like a different, like the judge's office to hide in in the closet. And then she wants a story, and so he has to tell this like funny story about fairies, and it's essentially just about immortals or whatever. Anyway, so so then she ends up killing everybody, and then except the serial murderer guy, and he's like super freaking out, and the helicopter finally arrives for him to get out of there. So he grabs Tessa as like his lone hostage, and he's like running off, but for some reason he goes into like some office where Duncan's just like sitting at a desk, and he's got his like little poker that he's been killing dudes with, and he's like, I got an idea. How about we have a race? You grab the gun on the desk before I can grab this thing and stab you, and whoever wins gets like the girl. And then the guy's like, why the fuck would I do that? And in my head I'm like, why the fuck would he do that? And then Duncan is like, soldier's honor. And the guy's like, all right. And I was like, this guy's a terrible serial. Like, the fuck? All right, whatever. Anyway, so Duncan kills him, of course. Then he hugs it out with Tessa, and then they go back to the main area with everybody else, and brings a little girl, and the guy's like, oh, is there anything I can do for you? And Duncan's like, actually, yes, because Duncan's going to try to sneak out of there, right? Because he doesn't want to have to deal with like the fallout of any of this shit, or anyone asking him why he's like alive when he should be dead or anything like that, right? He can deal with that later. And so, what sketchy thing is going on up here, I wonder? I probably need to scoot over somehow. Okay. Oh, no, I don't need to do that. Okay, sorry, I'm on the road. Okay, and so the Duncan just gets like a baseball cap from this guy. And like hides his like beautiful long hair. And so he sneaks out and no one questions him. And then, you know, instead of like, oh, we got to question the hostages and hold them here, Tessa just like hops in her car where she's got like another speeding ticket or a parking ticket. And then Richie gets in, and then Duncan, instead of getting in the car and driving off with them, is just like, I'll catch you guys later. And he like wanders off into the crowd. And then the news anchor lady, she sees him and she's like, and that's the end of the episode. So we start off the next episode focusing on Tessa and her like adventure in the woods. So she's getting ready to head out. Well, first we start off with this like bizarre dark forest and like people getting shot or whatnot. And then Tessa's going to go take some pictures out in the woods for like the afternoon, and then she'll be back soon. Don't worry about it. And Richie's like, okay. So she heads out. She's taken some shots of like some ancient like Native American symbols on rocks and whatnot. And then these three like mountain men come and approach her, and they're super creepy as shit. And they essentially kidnap her because one guy's like, you're going to be my wife. And so she like argues with them and then gets dragged around, and she leaves some like stuff as they're going along so that Duncan can find her later. Meanwhile, Duncan gets home from whatever like fucking trip he was on. And Richie's like, oh, I thought you were Tessa. And he's like, where's Tessa? And it's like, well, she went to the woods. She was supposed to be back by now. And he's like, I'm going to go check that out. And Richie's like, tonight? And he's like, yeah, you stay here in case she shows back up. Don't worry about it. So he heads up and he meets a sheriff, like another, like a totally different sheriff or deputy or some kind of copper. And they talk about how these like three boys, there's like a guy and his like two sons, quote unquote. I've been in the woods for a couple years, and that they come and like rob this guy's place, like who has like a trading post or like a gas station / outpost or whatever up here in the woods. And they came by recently, and they're like, oh, your girl might be dead. I got some deputies. We're going to go try to hunt these guys down. And then McLeod's like, all right, I'm going to go take care of it on my own. Stay out of my way. And they're like, you're going to die. And he's like, yeah, whatever. So then we get like a fun adventure where like these three guys are trying to go through the woods, and one of the guys keeps trying to like rape Tessa and keeps getting stopped by like the main guy. And the main guy's like honorable, quote unquote, because he's going to like trick her into marrying him at some point by just like keeping her out in the woods forever. And we learn that like he kidnapped one of these guys like when he was 12, and the other guy like showed up when he was like 6 years ago. Oh no, he kidnapped him when he was 8, which was like 12 years ago. So now he's 20, and the other guy showed up like 6 years ago or something. And so now they are all traveling around together. And then Tessa is talking about how she's married, which she pretty much is, and that she's not going to be this guy's wife and yada yada. And then Duncan has like a recollection while he's going through the woods. There was like I don't think it was an immortal necessarily, but maybe it was a guy he met out here who he like taught him how to fight, and they like hung out and were like friends and all this stuff. And I was kind of confused if the guy was immortal or not, but later on it seems like he was, because guess what? Dun dun dun! This guy, the guy who kidnapped Tessa, he's an immortal. Wow, small world. And he's got a big fucking battle axe, which is badass. And Duncan like takes for him to fight with him later, which is cool. So then at some point Duncan like grabs one of the kids, and then kids are like 20-year-old man, and then the other guy like comes up from behind, and so Duncan has to like jump into like a ravine, and then he climbs back out when he heals up, and then he heads down to like the river and he starts stalking these guys. And then they go out to like look for him or something, and one of the guys he gets jumped by McLeod and tied up and put in the woods. And then the main guy thinks that Duncan killed him and comes back, and he's like yelling at Tessa, and then Tessa's like, he would never do that, maybe it's your buddy over here. And so the other guy's like sketchy and keeps trying to rape Tessa and all that stuff that's going on with that. Eventually that kind of comes to head, and the main guy like shoots the other guy who's not like the other guy, because he thinks he did something. And then at that point Duncan like shows up, and then Tessa like hits the guy from behind while he's like trying to shoot at Duncan, and then Duncan runs up and grabs the battle axe, and the guy grabs the katana because Duncan had brought his katana, but then one of the kids like took it one of like quote unquote children took it, and that's when that we found out he was an immortal and whatnot. Like a lot of this episode is them just like tracking each other and doing wood stuff, and Duncan like recalling how to be a better tracker, and then the police tracking them and all that stuff. So eventually we get to the battle, and the battle's cool. So Duncan ends up with the battle axe, and the guy ends up with the katana, and they fight for a little bit. And that's where the guy mentions that the dude who was in these woods that Duncan knew, who kind of taught him how to be a tracker and all that stuff, that I guess he was an immortal, because this guy mentions like killing him. And then they fight for a bit, and then Duncan, and this episode is like for the ladies for sure, because Adrian, whatever his name is, who plays Duncan MacLeod, he is like shirt off with his like studly freaking like super muscles and long beautiful hair, running through the woods, and he's like fighting in the water, and like it's like, dang girl. So eventually he kills the guy with the battle axe, and then the quickening. And I think this is the first time Tessa's seen him like get the quickening, like the powers, and she hugs him. And then he builds like a little cairn for him with like stones to bury him, most likely to avoid like the fact that he's headless. And the police show up, and they're just like, and they're not even like policing us. They're like forest rangers, and they're like, okay, that sounds good, whatever. And the guy's like, he's a ghost. We killed him, and he's still alive. And everyone's like, all right, crazy. What about this other guy? And it's like, well, he shot him. And they're like, okay. And then they leave, and then Duncan goes over and picks up his katana, and he's like, let's go. So the next episode, I apologize a little bit, I'm sick. So anyway, this focuses heavily on our friend, the investigative reporter. She really wants to be an investigative reporter, go do investigating reporting stuff, but they want her because she's hot to be an inker at her job. And so while she's going back and forth about that, she hears that there's this hit and run, and there's somebody at the hospital, and yada yada yada. So she gets one of the guys who's with her while they're at the anchor thing, because the news at 11 or whatever, it doesn't start for 4 hours, to go check it out. And we head over to the hospital and find out that it's Duncan MacLeod. So what happened? He got jumped by some dudes, I guess. It was super dark. Or he got hit by a car or something. Anyway, so then he ends up in the ER. Well, I think what happened is, so he ends up in the ER, and then he wakes up and he escapes out of there. And then the doctor who's working on him is sketchy as fuck. He is like psycho. He's like what's the term? He's like manipulating the nurse, who's super hot as well, into like loving on him, so that she will like go along with his schemes. And what he's been doing is he'll like take people from the emergency room that are like possibly gonna die, and then they'll get released, and then he'll take them to like his lab in his like mountain cabin. It's a super nice looking fucking house. And then he will dissect them for like the future of humanity or some crazy bullshit like that. Anyway, so he gets MacLeod. He hits him with a car again. It was kind of hard to tell if he was the guy who hit him the first time, but I think that's what is implied. It takes him back to his place. Obviously, MacLeod is immortal, so when he cuts him to get some like tissue samples, the MacLeod heals like almost instantaneously, and he's like, ooh. At some point, and like, for the first like almost the entire episode, we were going to like Tessa and Richie, and they're worried about MacLeod and looking for him, and the investigative reporter's like talking to the nurse, talking to the doctor, trying to figure out what's going on. The name Duncan MacLeod comes up. She's trying to figure out what's going on with that. She's like very invested in this whole situation. Eventually Duncan escapes because the doctor's just like at his job, and he finally gets in touch with Tessa. And then we learn at some point the nurse who's trying to get laid by this doctor gets really mad at him because they were supposed to go to like a party together, and then he bailed. And then she starts questioning all the people that are like disappearing, and how she keeps helping him like cover stuff up so that he's not involved, and she wants to know the truth and all this stuff. And so he kills her, right? But he stole Duncan's car, and so he's like driving around in it. And so people think like Duncan MacLeod is the person who killed the nurse because his car was seen like fleeing the crime scene. So once Duncan like kind of recovers for the night, and Tessa comes and picks him up with the help of Richie, like sabotaging a police vehicle that's like watching his place, they are talking about the nurse, and God, they got some information about her. I'm trying to remember what it was. Something about how like she's missing a camera. And then it's like, well, why would someone steal a camera instead of a purse? It's like, oh, well, she was killed on a bridge. Maybe she dropped the camera. So they go, and Duncan like dives into the water, gets the camera, and it's like waterlogged, obviously. But he has his like forger buddy who helps him identify stuff. And so they head over there, and the guy's able to get like enough of the picture, and then they use like computer magic to discover that the she took like the last picture she took was like a hand with a ring on it. And the ring had like the Omicron symbol on it as like the first symbol. And then they used like some asshole like IRC chat search to like fucking sleuth. Like, it's funny because it's like that's not how computers work at all, and that's not how like ancient. There's no such thing as like I could just search this on a computer, like, right? It's like just using MS DOS, essentially. Like, it's all kind of like stupid nonsense, but it's better computer usage than like most shows where it's just like click, 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 click. This guy's like click, click, type, 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 enter, and then they just like look at a screen, and it's like, well, that's actually how computers work. I mean, in like 1982 or whatever this show is fucking going on, there was no like web crawler search for like this shit, right? There's no Wikipedia where you could be like, give me, or chat GBT. There you go. Anyway, so they find out that there's only one organization with an Omicron symbol that starts with it, and it's a medical society, and there's 33 doctors in the city of Gotham where they live, and only one of them was working on McCloud. Okay, so they figured it out. So they go to the hospital where he works, and then Tessa uses the magic power of being a hot chick to like get his address from like the nurse who's running the station, and acting like she's kind of a ditz. And so then they track the place down, and at that point, the investigative reporter has like gone to like demand he give her answers for the news, and he's like, all right, I'll come inside, I'll brew some tea or whatever. And of course she's an idiot, so she's like, sure, sounds good. So she goes inside, immediately gets like captured, and then he's talking about doing experiments on her and stuff, and she's all drugged up, and he's about to like do his thing with McCloud, like is like, ta-da, I'm here. And then they start kind of fighting, like throwing stuff at each other, which is weird. And then McCloud gets some powder in his face, and then Tessa comes down and like beats the shit out of the guy, and knocking him into like a table. And then Cloud like flips him over like a table, knocking the investigative reporter over, and it kind of kills him. And then the place is like on fire at some point. Anyway, and then it's like later, the investigative reporter's doing okay. Tessa's standing there. McCloud's like standing in an alleyway. It's like, and there's police everywhere. So it's like, is he hiding from the police? But then the police officer's like, what do you think, McCloud? And I was like, why was he standing off like like half hidden? Like the fuck. Anyway, he tells them like about the doctor and something, and the reporter's like, yeah, that's strict and verified. He's like, all right, sounds good. And then Duncan and Tessa wander off, which is the end of episode 8. Oh, right. So we run into another one of Richie's like girlfriends. This one's name is, now I was a little confused. It seemed like her name was Melinda, but then it seemed like her daughter's name was also Melinda, or just Linda. So I don't know if I ever caught her name or I just kept hearing the kid's name. Anyway, you can tell how much attention I pay sometimes when I watch this shit. Anyway, this episode is pretty fun. It involves some communists from like actual communist Russia, which they're not really communists. They're more Leninists. Anyway, so what's going on is Richie meets this chick. Her boyfriend is being an asshole, and so he goes up to like kind of fight with him, and then she's like, leave him alone, something. And he's like, you need to treat her better. And he's like, whatever, man. And so Richie follows them, and they're going to make like a drug deal with some like shady dudes. But then like the boyfriend pulls out a gun for some reason instead of just trading like money for coke so he can go sell it on the streets or whatever. And then so there's like a shootout, and then Richie like grabs the money. Does he grab the money? He grabs the girl, she grabs the money and the cocaine or whatever. They run off. They go get like her little girl, because she's got a little girl, not with the guy. She got like knocked up as a teenager or something, most likely, because this girl looks like she's 10 and Richie's supposed to be like 18. Anyway, so and they head over to the McCloud's antique parlor or whatever, where Tessa and Duncan are like, the fuck's going on with this? And so they have a conversation. She's going to stay there with the girl, and then Duncan needs to have like a serious fatherly conversation with this drug dealing lady. And he's like, what's going on? Why are these guys chasing you? Because McCloud, no, okay, what happens is they're running away, and then they get caught up, and then McCloud at some point is like, I gotta figure out what's going on with Richie. Like, where the fuck is this guy? So he goes out, and then he finds them being attacked by these guys, and he by these like goons, and then he goes and he beats up the goons. That's right. And then he rescues, and then he brings them back. So then he has a fatherly talk. He's like, if they're chasing you this hard, it's got to be drugs or money. And then she's like, okay, it's cocaine. Here you go. And so he flushes it down the drain, and then we go over and we meet this like Russian guy, or he looks. It's like it takes place kind of like in Russia, like the past stuff, but like at some point it's like this is a Yugoslavian ship, so he might be Yugoslavian. Anyway. And what we what we come to find out pretty quickly is she also has the money, but she's hiding that, not saying anything about it. So Tessa gets like real warm and fuzzy with this girl, the little girl, and part of the theme of the episode is her just being like connecting with the girl like a mother, and then feeling sad, and then like the lady gets like really jealous that Tessa and the little girl are like connecting so well, and then at some point she was gonna like abandon her daughter, but then she gets nabbed by the goons, and then the goons take her to like their boss, and then they have like a conversation about how she's gonna get the money back, and she's like, here's the money, and inside the bag that she had the money is the socks, because the night before the little girl found the money and like took it out and put socks in there for some fucking reason so we could have more plot. Anyway, because that all happened, the one of the goons takes her back to get the money at the McLeod place, and then Richie and Duncan show up while they're there looking for the money, and then they beat this guy up and they're about to kill him. And at some point the guy is like, when he's talking to his goons, he's like, wait, did you say McLeod? Does he have a sword? And they're like, a sword? The fuck? And he's like, just find out. And they're like, okay. So the goon gets a call from the boss man, and then he hands his phone over to McLeod, and McLeod answers it, and the guy's like, Duncan McLeod, and then Duncan's like, you motherfucker. And then we go back in time to like communist Russia, quote unquote communist Russia, and where we see that Duncan, he's an immortal, and this other guy's an immortal, obviously, and he had a deal where like he didn't cut this guy's head off, so he like owed him, and so he was going to get some of his like family and friends out of communist Russia before it got like real bad and the purges really happened. But then some dudes roll up and we find this guy like betrayed Duncan and was going to kill all these people and then get Duncan shot so we could take his head. And so Duncan like runs off and hides in the water, and then the guy's like, oh, you motherfucker. And the name of the ship is the Sea Witch, and then his new ship that he's like residing on is like a mobster, is like the Sea Witch 2, right? Get it? Get it? So they decide they're going to meet up and fight, and then we get some more drama about like the girl, and like Tessa gives her a doll, and the girl's so happy, and the mom like yells at Tessa, and there's a lot of that. And then at some point the mom like apologizes for everything that happened and gives like the money back to Duncan. And he's like, no problem. So then he goes, and they get into like a little spat because the guy like kicks all the goons off the ship. And so then Duncan and him have this badass battle where they're like battling in the cabin, then they're battling in like the main area, like the wherever the pilot sits for the ship. And at some point they like turn the ship's engine on, so like the blaze run in the background, and you obviously know where this is going if you pay attention to anything. So then they fight some more. They like, the guy like hides, Duncan sneaks around, he gets hit with something, then they fight some more, they both lose their swords, and then at some point they get like wrapped up in some rope and they both fall off the edge of the ship. And so that's poetic because remember Duncan had to like hide in the water, but this time when they're in the back of this ship, if you can remember, the engine's going, so the spinner blades are going, and so Duncan like climbs out of the water and up on the ship, and he grabs his sword, but then dun dun dun, the spinning blade like killed the fuck out of this dude. Like it chopped him up real good, and to a point where it cut his head off, and then Duncan gets like the quickening, and it's like, dude, and he's all shocked and stuff. We then head to like the next day. We found out the cops arrested us, the goons. They're all going to jail for a long time for being assholes. And the money, the woman can keep the money. She's going to Danville, Connecticut. I guess maybe I don't know. Anyway, and then Tessa makes sure the little girl has the doll, and she hugs her and tells her she's never gonna forget her and stuff, because it's like the daughter she never had and whatnot. And she's sad about it, but her and Duncan have a conversation earlier in the episode, and she's like, I'm sad, but at the same time, I'd never give up what I have. And Duncan's like, you sure? And she's like, yes. And he's like, okie dokie. And then at some point, they're like, where's Duncan? And he's like, oh, he's saying about in his own way. And we see him just standing on like a pier, and he like throws the cutlass that the guy was using out into the river. And some guy's like, that's expensive, or that must have cost a lot. And Duncan's like, you bet it did. So we start off with a sword fight in this one. It's pretty exciting. It's on a boat. It's New Year's Eve of 1989. So I guess the current era, because someone at some point mentions that it's been a couple years. So it's at least like 91, I want to say, when this show's going on. It seems like it's filmed in winter in like Southern California, because Southern California will get cold in the winter. Like we're talking like 40s, 50s. I know because I lived there for several years. Right, because it's still kind of like, here's Gotham City. It's got some like crazy intense like downtown area, which LA does have. But there's never snow. It doesn't really rain. It's just like the way the stuff's set up. There's mountains nearby. Like, it just seems like it's probably filmed in Southern California. Anyway, so McCloud ends up beating this guy, but then he dives off this like pleasure yacht that they're on, or cruise liner or something, into the water. And then McCloud goes down and like kisses Tessa as like the countdown begins. All right, so then we go a couple years forward into the present, and we see this chick like walking down the road, and these guys hitting on her, and then Tessa like summons McCloud to like for her honor or something, but then she like fucks this guy up, like trips him or something. She comes in, she had called about a javelin or something, but she sees this rapier. Oh no, I think it was a scimitar. I know it's one of those fencing swords. Saber, sorry, not a scimitar. There's sabers, there's epis, and there's rapiers. I think those are the fencing swords. Anyway, so I think this is a saber. So she sees that. She gets super excited about that. She wants to try it out. She wants Duncan to come to her place so she can try it out. Tessa gets like very jealous and also very concerned. Anyway, so he heads over. Oh, and then we find out. Oh, so he heads over there. She wants to like fight. They fight a little bit. And then she says some like crazy shit. And he's like, all right, whatever, I'm leaving. Because clearly she wants something from McCloud, but it's not the sword. And it's not sex either. Meanwhile, Richie is like wearing a business suit, and Tessa's like, "The fuck is this?" And he's like, "I'm gonna go be a used car salesman," and she's like, "That's insane." And then Duncan comes in, and she's like, "Tell our son he can't go be a used car salesman." And Duncan's like, "No, it's fine." And so he leaves, and she's like, "What the fuck was that?" And Duncan's like, "Hey man, you gotta let people make their own mistakes." Anyway, we get the return of Angie finally. As Richie successfully sells her some used car, which becomes important to the plot, because everything in this show is written so well. It's very tight. Anyway, we get some like more craziness. There's like the guy who was like sexually harassing. I think her name's Rebecca or Rachel. I think it's Rachel. Something with an R. She, the saber lady. And so this guy is found dead with like a fencing wound on his heart right near Duncan's place. And then when Duncan was fighting her, he had like a flashback to like this asshole. God, what was his fucking name? Anyway, it's the guy he found on the boat, but this is like way back in like colonial days or something. He had like tried to steal from like this noble lady that Duncan was like hired on to protect, and he almost killed like her son because he thought he was an immortal, but it was really Duncan that was there. Anyway, so that's how they originally met, and he talks about how this guy Walter or something, how he's like a real asshole, and how he just like does not care about human beings. It's kind of similar to the guy from the previous episode. And he just uses mortals to get what he wants, and he's like an investment banker, and he's like, oh, you know, he's bought like companies and then fired everybody and sold them for like profit and stuff, and he just has like he's like kind of like a psychopath in that regard, but it's also because he's like an alien, so it's like whatever, I don't care about these mortals, these humans. And Duncan is like convinced, Reinhardt, that's his name, so he's convinced this Reinhardt guy is out and about and he's causing all these problems, and that the Rebecca lady or Rachel lady is like being used by him, and then Tessa's like not convinced. Anyway, so we get more episode of kind of stuff. He goes and like confronts her, and then she comes in and like steals the sword and says something to Tessa, and now they're like both convinced she's not the one who's like trying to kill Duncan, because she's pretty convinced that her ex-fiance, who's this Reinhardt guy, it was killed by McCloud. And we find more about that as well, because Richie goes to like the library to like do research for Duncan while he's like, I don't know, off doing whatever fucking thing he does all day. Anyway, at some point, Tessa gets like a dress in the mail, and she tries it on, and she's like, "Oh, it's so sexy!" Right when Duncan gets home, he's like, "I didn't send you that dress," and then she starts like freaking out, and he like tears it off her and like takes her to the shower, and had some chemical powder inside that like reacted to like her body heat or something, and it caused like a rash, or caused her to like, it's like acidic or something, and so the doctor's like, she'll be okay, but she just needs rest. And then at the same time, Angie comes back to the car lot where Richie's working, and is like, my fucking car's not working. And then Richie gets into it with like his boss, and the guy's like, no refunds. And he's like, whatever, man, I'll make. And then Angie's like, Richie, you're supposed to be my boyfriend. And he's like, I know, I'll make it right. And then the guy gets like a call, and it's like, hey, we need a Mercedes-Benz delivered to this guy, and he's gonna pay us $40,000. Richie's like, whatever, man, I quit, fuck you. And the guy's like, I'll fix your girlfriend's car, and no charge, and take care of everything. You just gotta go do this. It's like a lot of money for me. And Richie's like, all right, fine. And he gives his girlfriend like a thumbs up, and it's like, bro, you didn't do shit. Whatever. So he goes, and of course it's Reinhardt. Reinhardt also sent the dress, and he killed the guy and everything, right? It's Reinhardt's been manipulating everything behind the scenes this whole time. And so then Richie calls Duncan and uses like code talk so that he knows that Reinhardt kidnapped him, and it's not actually Richie telling him to meet him, or that he needs to meet up with like Rebecca at her place like the next morning at 9 o'clock in the morning or something. So anyway, so Duncan goes there, and then he confronts the lady, the fiance, and they have and then Reinhardt shows up with Richie, who is tied up in the car, and then Reinhardt goes to sneak around, and when he sneaks around the back, he sees the girl sword fighting with Duncan, and then it looks like Duncan kills her, and then Reinhardt comes in and like is clapping, and he's like, aha, I tricked you into killing a mortal, and then she stands up like, you bastard, and then she goes to like fight him, and he knocks her out pretty quick, because I loved you, and now I hate you, and he's like, whatever, you're just a dumb bitch. And then McLeod and him get into like a very short conversation about treating people with respect, and how Duncan needs to realize that the mortals are just like their slaves, and they need to stop treating them with respect. And then they sword fight in this house, and they crash through a window, and they're like fighting in a garden, which was kind of funny, because like the Reinhardt guy's like literally in the middle of like bushes and stuff for some fucking reason. Anyway, Duncan gets him real good, and then cuts off his head, and then like there should be only one, and the gathering and all that stuff, or the quickening occurs. And then we get like a little farewell. Richie shows up and he's like, all right, problem solved. I'm out of here. And then him and Duncan and the Rebecca lady, they have like a little conversation. She's like, oh, strong man. He was such a strong man, but you're a stronger man. And I wish I'd found you first. And Duncan's like, interesting. And then we get like the sweet ass Queen song, right? But it's not by Queen for the show because I don't want to pay royalties. I guess it's like a cover. I can't remember who does it for the show. Anyway. The who wants to be forever or live forever, blah, blah, blah. Good stuff. And then, Duncan walks off, ending the episode. So in this episode, we focus on this serial killer, but it's not an immortal serial killer. But it still ties in kind of to the immortal thing. So we start off with this woman. She's at a stadium, Staples, I think, in Los Angeles, I think is what it's supposed to be. And she's like waiting for Tessa's, they're like, they redid the stadium. And then Tessa's like in the vying for like doing art shit for the stadium stuff, like a statue or something. And so Tessa and Duncan head over to speak with this lady. Meanwhile, she's being stalked by some crazy guy who tries to scalp her. Right as he's like trying to scalp her, Duncan and Tessa show up and they save her from being murdered. And then Duncan chases the guy down, but then the guy gets like the jump on Duncan, gets on his like little Indian motorcycle, and then takes off. A bit later, we have a lot of this episode deals with the police trying to capture this guy. And this guy's not immortal, along with the newscaster who is more and more involved in this show. So Duncan, a bit later, is talking to Tessa about, like, Tessa goes to check on her, like, her friend. They have some relation. They went to college together or something, or they, like, met somewhere else. That's how Tessa knows this lady. So they're kind of, like, friends. So she goes and checks on him, and when she comes back from the hospital, Duncan's looking through some like old shit that he has, and then she's like, is this an immortal thing? And he's like, not really. And then we get like the background where it's like this guy was an immortal, and he was betrayed by like the woman he loved. She tried to burn him at the stake for being like a witch, and so he went back and killed her, and then he kind of went crazy and started just like serial killing people, and he killed like 8 people in 10 days or 5 people in 10 days or something like that. And it's all like these blonde women who kind of look the same, and Duncan ends up stopping him at the theater, which is now the Staples Stadium where the Lakers play. I think it was Staples, that's what they said, because this is like Los Angeles but also kind of not Los Angeles because I think it's filmed like Toronto. Anyway, sorry, I'm sick still. And so Duncan and him have a grand old immortal fight, and he cuts off his head. All right, so then most of the episode is Duncan doing investigations and then feeding information to the investigative reporter lady, who then feeds information to the police so they can do their investigation. And then there's this police officer who almost gets scalped because there's like a creepy dude who is like in love with the guy's name is Marcus, that's the name of the immortal. And so he's crazy too, and he's like studied this guy's stuff, and he's like, I will continue your work. And we get some shots of him being like crazy, and then he kills, I think he killed somebody, and then he tried to kill Tessa's friend, and we get some PTSD stuff with Tessa's friend. She's like looking in the mirror and freaking out, and she's having like nightmares and stuff. So it's very well represented. It's not PTSD. So for those of you not in the know, when you have a traumatic event and you have there's like a natural down reaction to it, right? So she's kind of in that natural down reaction. You can also call it like acute stress disorder because it's affecting her ability to move on and stuff. But technically, it's not. You don't have PTSD until at least like 30 days after the event occurred, because it's post-traumatic. So within that first month, it's still like considered within like the traumatic window, just so you know. Okay, so moving forward, So yeah, we bounce around between her having like episodes, Tessa doing that, Richie and Duncan doing investigations. Like they like pay off this motorcycle guy because he has like I said, he has like an Indian motorcycle, which are like old school motorcycles they haven't sold since like at least like the 60s or 70s. And there's like one shop in town, I guess, even though it's Los Angeles, which is like the second biggest city in the country, or third now because Houston. And so they go pay that guy to give him a call, and so he gives Richie a call. Richie goes, tries to track the guy down, hurts himself, and then they're trying to come up with a scheme to like trap this guy because he killed someone else like in the meantime. And what eventually happens is this Tessa is like, I'll volunteer to be like a what do you call it? It could be bait. And so they set up this thing in the newspaper and with the newscaster reporter where they're like, oh, the police are closing in on this guy. They know about him, something. And then there's like a newspaper ad, right, back when we had newspapers in the 90s. And it's like, oh, there's a not a recital. There's like a call for actresses to be in this new movie, and they got to be blonde with long hair and whatnot. And so then Richie just like, it's like a fake ad, so Richie's been like answering calls all day, and at some point Angie calls, so it's like, hey, don't forget Angie still exists. Right, we don't hear her voice. It's one of those like sneaky, like we don't have to pay anybody shit because Richie's just talking to the phone to himself. He's a good actor. He does a good job. Anyway, and essentially he's answering calls and telling people that like it's already been cast because Tessa's going to be the victim, right? So then we go to the theater a little bit later, and Tessa is walking around and then goes in the theater, and they're just waiting for this guy to pop up, and then and he's there and he's like stalking, and then because he's like, oh, blonde chicks, excellent, this is going to be like my playground. And then this chick shows up who I guess didn't call, just like showed up, and she gets jumped by this guy, but she was wearing a wig. She actually got brown hair, so the guy's like, nope, not my interest, so he like shoves her aside, and then the whole thing's kind of bust, but they hear her scream, so Duncan goes to check on her, and then Richie takes Tessa to Duncan's car, and while they're there, they see the Indian, and so Richie's like, I'll take care of that. So he goes and he's going to do his like sneaky thing where he like pops a tire in the car, but then the guy shows up and pushes Richie over, and he's like pulling out his knife, and then Tessa like freaks out, so she gets in the car and smashes right into him with the fucking car, and he's like laying on the ground being like, oh, help me. And then the newscast lady like rolls up, and she's like, film this piece of shit. Oh man. Anyway, previously in the episode, Duncan's talking to the lady who almost got scalped, and she's like, I'm gonna kill this motherfucker so bad, and she's like, I wish I had a gun, and he's like, you be careful what you wish for, like killing somebody is not like as fun as you think it's gonna be. Like even if it's in self-defense, like it's like killing people is like a big deal, which is relevant because it's like, oh shit, did Tessa kill this guy with the car? She's like shook up. She's like, holy shit, I fucking murked this guy. Luckily for her, he's not dead, but she's still kind of like traumatized from like causing such severe injuries. She's like, holy shit, I could kill that guy. Right? And like human beings who aren't like crazy or like do not like killing people, right? There's like something built into our system biologically because of like survival of the species and whatnot. Anyway, so then the lady finally is kind of like recovered now that this guy's in jail and can't hurt anyone else, and so she heads home, and then Tessa's kind of freaking out, and so Duncan hugs her, and they have like a nice little moment before the episode wraps up. So we start off with in this next episode with Richie doing some like parking shenanigans and putting like an out of order sign on like a fucking parking meter. He's going to Tessa's doing like her little art show at a gallery or whatever. So we get some of him like flirting with a girl, and then they get like a scene of him just like going off to make out with her at some point. Bizarre. Anyway, so the main point is that Tessa meets this girl, Anne, who used to be an artist, and they connect talking about some of her art. And then while Tessa's like taking a break from the gallery show, she sees Anne arguing with a guy on a bridge, and then like the gallery owner like comes in to get her to come out to do like a speech or something. And when she looks back, it looks like Anne is dead because the guy's just like looking over the bridge and then like wipes his hands clean, you know, and then he gets in his car and drives off. So then she makes a big deal about it, but they can't find a body. There's no evidence of like a struggle. She didn't even see the actual death. So the police officer, we've had the same, this is like police officer number 3, but he's been in the last like 4 or 5 episodes. So it seems like he's going to be more of a mainstay, and he's a lieutenant detective guy. Anyway, so then she complains to him a lot, and a lot of the episode is is Tessa arguing with the police, and then the police being involved with stuff, and it's a big deal because at some point Duncan he like senses an immortal and goes into Tessa's workshop and finds a guy there, and it's an immortal, so they kind of fight, and then he breaks the guy's sword, and then the guy like runs off, and then Duncan's like, huh. And so we start, if you were paying attention to the show, like not Duncan or Tessa or the police, but you recognize that the guy that was in the gallery is the same guy who killed the woman who's an immortal, and then we shortly find out that dun dun dun, he's the chief of fucking police. What? Right? So then he does some more shenanigans. Like, he tries to snipe fucking Tessa out of her car and ends up shooting Duncan a couple times. And Duncan gets in the way because, like, whatever. And then, Tessa tracks down like this lady's like home address, and there's like a kindly old woman who's like her caregiver, and we learn that she's like moved around, and then eventually we learn that she gave up painting because of some guy that like broke up with her, who is obviously this immortal guy. And then as things kind of get twisted, Duncan and Tessa still don't know that the police are necessarily involved. Like, the police chief is the immortal who's trying to kill her or whatnot. But at some point after the sniper attack, Tessa gets taken into like custody, not like to jail, but to like protective, like a witness protection program or whatever. But the person who ordered it is chief of police, so obviously he's going to do something about it. And Duncan gets Richie to follow them, and then he follows Richie, so that when Richie gets caught because he's bad at stuff, then they don't suspect anyone else following. So he's able to like track down this like safe house, and he's hanging out outside watching. And then he like senses an immortal because the chief of police like shows up, and he sets like a fucking bomb on this house, like on the gas intake into the house to blow it up. And so he runs over, and the guy like chief police like gets in his car and like runs off, and Duncan's like checking him out. He's like, it's the same motherfucker. And he goes in and sees the bomb's gonna go off in like 2 minutes, so he breaks into the house, essentially runs up, knocks on the door, the guy opens it, he's like, you gotta get out of this, there's a bomb in 2 minutes. And then the police lieutenant is like, the fuck? And then Duncan like hits him in the stomach and takes his gun, is like, I'm taking Tessa and getting the fuck out, you guys should get out too, because this place is gonna blow up. So he grabs Tessa, they run out and get behind his car, and then the cops like grab their buddy and they come running out, and the whole place explodes, and the lieutenant's like, holy shit, thank you. what happened? He's like, I saw somebody. It's like, do you know what it is? And Duncan's like, no. Oh, also that's going on in this episode, our friend the investigative reporter shows up again, and she's trying to talk to Duncan, and it seems like she's trying to make friends with Tessa, and Tessa's still like, all you want is like a story, and you don't really care about people, blah 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 blah, which is kind of harsh but true, right? But then the woman makes like overtures to try to be friendlier with Tessa and be more of her friend and stuff, so that they can get along and be friends, I guess. So then she doesn't really play much a role in the story besides just kind of like chit-chatting with her a little bit. After the explosion, then Duncan's like, all right, I got to take care of this. And he asks, he's like, who knew about the safe house? And the police lieutenant's like, oh, the police chief, me, and that was it. And then the guys that were with him. And he's like, dun dun dun. So then he calls the police chief guy, and then the guy's like in his office, answers phone. He's like, oh, I figured you'd call. And so they meet up at like this like ball of light. It's like from one of these like World Fair things. I'm trying to remember where I've seen it before. Anyway, so then they have like an awesome sword fight, and then Duncan ends up killing him because they're gonna be only one. And then then the chief police comes like the next day, or not police chief, the police lieutenant comes the next day, and he's like, this case is just weirder and weirder. We find the police chief murdered, and then we found like a sniper rifle in his fucking car that matches the ballistics on the rifle that shot you. And then we also, like, from his jacket, there's like fibers underneath the fingers of like the Ann lady who got killed that match. And so it's like, he killed her, and then he was trying to cover it up. Like, what a crazy. And then someone just came along and cut his head off. Crazy shit. And then he leaves, and then Duncan and Tessa get like really, they talk about being obsessed, and how this woman was obsessed, and that part of the reason why he killed her is because she threatened to like tell everybody that he was an immortal unless they got back together, because she was like so obsessed with this guy. And then they start getting like real flirty, and then they go off into the bedroom to fuck. Which ends the episode. So now we're on episode 13, which is kind of like the mid-season break. So there's going to be some fun changes that occur as part of this. We start with Tessa coming in. Well, we start with this priest who is like hanging out in Paris, and then this guy's running up to the church that he's in, and he gets a knife in his back. And then the priest, whose name is Darius, starts talking to this guy, Grayson, about how they used to be like friends like 1,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago, like a long fucking time. But then they've had disagreements, and that Grayson is like super upset still, and is like killing all the disciples, and that there's a disciple in New York that he's going to go kill as well. And then we head over to New York with the McLeod and Tessa and Richie, and we find out that Tessa's gotten an offer to curate like a museum, or be like somehow involved in like museum of like the Louvre, I want to say. They say I don't think they call it the Louvre, but they're like, oh, this big museum in Paris. They might have said the Louvre. I don't know. I didn't catch it. We're just going to assume that's what it is. Right. So a pretty prestigious job. Like, she's going to go over there and like take care of like the modern art section, or do whatever. curating. And those jobs are pretty like cush, not gonna lie. Like if you're just like some museum guy with like a master's in museum stuff, like I dated a girl in college who was like a museum lady, like like a docent or something. No, I think the docents are the ones who do the guides. Anyway, she did some curation, and she was making like 6 figures. So not bad, but like if you're like the head curator, some of those museums like they make a lot of money. You can make like $500,000 easy. Anyway, so fun job in case you're looking for something, I guess. So, but Richie's like super concerned because they're going to leave him alone. He's going to be stuck in New York and he's going to be poor again. And who's going to run the antique shop and yada, 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 yada. And they're just like, shut the fuck up, Richie. We then get a letter delivered to Duncan, and it's rune stones, and they're fucking like so old it stopped being a language like 2,000 years ago or something. But Duncan was taught this by his friend Darius. And who's Darius? Darius is the priest, right? This is where we find out who he is, and he's an immortal, and he swore off like the game like hundreds of years ago. And we learn throughout this episode that he like led an army into like Rome or somewhere, and there he fought like an immortal in front of the city, and when he defeated him, he had like a complete change of heart about the whole thing, and he was like, I'm not going to fight anymore, and so he stopped. And this Grayson guy, who's the guy who threw the dagger in the back, who's coming to New York to cause like problems, he was like a partner, or like they were like, they like worked together. And so then Grayson got really butthurt when Darius like swore off the war, and he's been like a thorn in his side ever since. And we learned that Duncan met Darius during some sort of like, Duncan's wearing a red coat, so I assume and I don't think he was in the U.S. because they're in like Europe, so I assume it's like the 100 Years' War or something like that, which I think Duncan could have been alive for because he's been alive since like, I think he's 400 years old, so that would have been like the 1600s or 1300s. So I think the 100 Years' War, I think that fits. I'm not a super big fan of like European, like Northern European history and like British history, so I know like very little about it. I went to England once and I learned like bits and pieces, but I really don't give a fuck. So something like that. Anyway, some more with the British. And so he needs to like go and like think about this whole thing and whatnot because he knows Grayson is coming and he knows something else as well. And so him and Richie go to like the cabin that he has like in the mountains, and it's actually snowing up there, which it snows in Tahoe. So I assume this is like filmed in Los Angeles, so it's not like that is a plausible thing that could occur. Right, we just never seen snow in the first like 12 episodes. So that was fun. And there's another rune stone in there, and Richie's asking about it, and he mentions somebody else. And so, meanwhile, Tessa's just hanging out at the shop when Grayson comes by, and she like calls him out and being an immortal and being kind of an asshole. And he's like, "Oh, I can see why Duncan's so enamored with you. You're quite the lady." And she's like, "Whatever. If you're gonna kill me, just kill me now." And he's like, "No, no, no." And then we find out later that that's not his style like at all. He like, he's just kind of an asshole who loves war, and he's like a gun runner or whatever. Anyway, since Duncan found out that there's another guy, I can't remember what his name is. He's some like Nobel Peace Prize winner or whatever who's preaching peace and anti-war and whatnot. Grayson wants him killed, so he has like a whole crew network of dudes who are trying to like assassinate him. And so Duncan spends most of the episode like intercepting and stopping those assassinations from happening. And then him and Grayson like come to odds a couple times. And then at one point they're like, all right, let's fucking do this. So they start fighting, and then some like teenage nerds like drive by. They're like, whoa, freaks. And they're like, all right, we'll do this again later. After the second fail, and then finally Duncan's like, hey, you should go to this Paris thing and take Richie with you. And Tessa's super mad because she doesn't like being told what to do because she's like a modern woman in the 80s, which means she's still extremely feminine and not like a bitch, unlike, certain things in the year 2020 forward. But good stuff. Anyway, because you could be a woman who embraces her femininity and still be strong and still have like a career and do stuff, or you can just be a man and be miserable and have cats. Anyway, so oh Lord. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, so we get Duncan. Another. Oh, and meanwhile, the investigative journalist lady is like around doing stuff, and her and Duncan have a couple conversations, and she thinks he works for some like top secret organization like the CIA or something, because he's like in the know, and he's like interrupting things that like even the CIA and FBI don't know about or whatever. And then he mentions like the Grayson character, and so she like intersects with that or whatever. And then at some point Duncan's like, you're a better person than you think you are, and then after the second failed assassination attempt, Duncan challenges Grayson to a fight. And there's a whole thing with Tessa being super concerned, and Duncan being kind of concerned too, because Grayson is like 1,400 years old, so he's like 1,000 years older than Duncan, and he's killed that many more immortals and had that much more experience in life and intelligence and like wisdom and all that stuff. So it's like he's clearly like the better fighter or whatnot. But you know, there's like 6 more seasons of this, and we're only halfway through the first season. So obviously, the fucking epic battle they have on like this like oil refinery plant or something, they're like rolling around in dirt and like jumping on things and like climbing up in things. And eventually, Duncan gets the he uses the power of like his chi or whatever to like center himself, and he's able to take advantage of the hubris of Grayson, and so is able to finally cut his head off. And it's like, yeah, take it, bitch. Meanwhile, over in France, or a bit later over in France, Duncan shows up, meets up with Darius, and then Tessa and Richie come running out. Tessa and Duncan hug it out, and then they go for like a little walk, and Richie's about to go with them, and Darius is like, hold up. How about I tell you a story about a horse? And he drags Richie back into the church. Oh, there's a scene of this show, too. There's like a full-on sex scene. It's badass, right? You get a lot of like sexy back, Tessa back and stuff. Stuff that would not fly on TV in the current the year, but year of our Lord 2025. But it was fucking all over the place in the 80s and 90s. Good fucking stuff. So yeah, so then they go off. They have like a little cutesy date, and then of course they fuck again. And then Duncan says something about living on a barge in Paris and just chilling while she works, which is how the rest of the season kind of gets going. Gay Paris. So we start off with some mimes doing mime shit. They called one of them like an acrobat at some point, which I guess they also paint their faces. Anyway, these guys kill a couple guys, and Duncan happens to like be around when one of them gets killed, and so he ends up fighting this guy. They get away, but then he does like a police report, and then we meet Detective something. He is the new police guy, I guess. The show goes through like police like frenemies like real fast. He's a bald guy. His whole thing is that he knows Duncan because back like 12 years ago, and we get this like awesome story. So 12 years ago, Duncan was in Paris, and he got into a fight with the guy who is like the lead mime guy, which he knew from like ancient Paris, like hundreds of years ago. I don't know how ancient, like it looked kind of like Baroque era, which is like 1700s, I think. Anyway, he was hanging out in Paris with some duke or something, and then the guy got killed by like a mime who was an immortal, and then Duncan like ran into that guy again like 12 years ago in Paris, and the guy jumped him because he's like an assassin, and he's like an assassin immortal, which is kind of cool. And Duncan was able to like fend him off enough and then like run away because he didn't have a sword with him. And then the police officer, who is now the detective 12 years later, but originally he was just like a regular police officer in his like cute little blue uniform. He rolls up, sees Duncan smash through a window and then run off. And then they chase after him, but Duncan's able to like get to like, I don't know which lake or which rivers in Paris. I'm not super familiar. But he gets there and then jumps onto this like tour barge. And guess who runs the tour? It's Tessa. That's how they met. And then they get to like a kind of funny argument, like a very poetious, cute argument. And she's looking fine as shit. Like they covered up like all her wrinkles and whatnot. Because remember, she's supposed to be like in her late 30s. So 12 years ago it would have been like mid 20s or young 20s. So, she's like something. I think the Notre Dame got rebuilt in like 14 something, and he's like 14 something else. And she's like, "How would you know unless you were there?" And he's like, "It's a little after my time." But it's super cute. So that's how I met Tessa 12 years ago. Oh, that's precious. Anyway, we get a little side story with Richie. He like buys this what is it called? Like when you just have the head of Napoleon, and Tessa hates it and breaks it. Anyway, so the detective's convinced Duncan knows the guy who he's actually after, which is like the immortal guy who's like the lead assassin in this like troupe. And he also, one of the sergeants who works for the detective, he is working for the assassin as well. And so he goes and tells him about Duncan, about all this stuff, and he's like, Duncan McLeod. And then one of his like goonies goes to like kill Duncan, but just ends up shooting the police officer instead. And Duncan visits him in the hospital and finally tells him that like, hey, you're a good cop. Maybe you should realize that one of the guys in your organization, you've been after this guy for like 12 years. Maybe one of the guys in your organization, he is a mole. He's working for the bad guy. So maybe you should consider that. And eventually the detective puts it together and figures out who it is. But in the meantime, Duncan, he does like this sneaky sneak. He's like looking around for like specialty shops or whatever, because he knows this guy has like very like fancy tastes. And he finds this liquor store where they sell absinthe, and absinthe is like super illegal, I guess, in like a lot of places, including France at this time. And so he goes in there and says like, "Oh, my friend sent me over here," and he throws this guy like $1,000 in like $100 bills, which in like nowadays money is like a lot more than that. It's like $5,000. It's a lot of fucking money. So he spends a lot of money on this like thing. I don't think it's $5,000, but it's definitely the value of the dollar is like, or the money in Paris specifically is probably diminished a lot. Anyway, so he buys some absinthe, and then he kind of like stocks this stuff. So next time the assassin guy like rolls up, he sees him, and then he's like standing at a church across the street, and the guy is like, "Oh, I hope your friend enjoyed the absinthe as well that you sent over here." And the assassin's like, "My friend?" And he's like, "Yeah, tall, handsome, dark hair." And he's like, "McLeod." And so he goes out and he sees Duncan just like standing there looking at him. And so they go and like have like a fun little chit chat. And the guy claims that he's killed like 2,000 immortals. Like, holy shit, how many immortals are there? Like the fuck? And he loves killing. Like everyone has their specialties. He's not good at singing, or he's decent at singing, but he's not good at like other shit, but he's great at killing. And Duncan's like, "You're a monster." And the guy's like, "What are you gonna do about it?" And he's like, "I'm gonna kill you right here." And the guy's like, "Oh, if you do, I'll wave a hand at this guy over there, and that guy's gonna shoot all these kids." And so then Duncan gets like, he lets him go, but then Duncan later on is like super upset, and Tessa's like, "What are you gonna do? Let him kill those kids? Come on, Duncan, don't be retarded." It's like, thanks for the pep talk. Anyway, Tessa goes off to do some, I don't know, whatever her job is now, museum curation. And Duncan gets approached by the mole, who's like, "Oh, hey, the detective wants to see you." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, the detective?" And he's like, "Yeah, he left the hospital, ha, ha, ha." And Duncan's like, right. Anyway, take me. So he takes him to, like, the factory where this guy's, like, hanging out with all his, like, mannequins and his, like, creepy, like, white-faced dolls and whatnot. And Duncan's like, "Hey, good luck with everything, something." And he tells him that he knows he brought him to the immortal guy. Guy doesn't know he's immortal, but the assassin guy, because he has the smell of like absinthe on his breath or whatever. So then Duncan goes inside and they have like a fun little conversation before they fight. And they fight. And eventually, and then meanwhile, while they're fighting, the sergeant gets like caught up by the detective, and he's like, "I know you are the mole. You're fucked." And he's like, "Tell me where fucking Duncan McLeod is, where you took Duncan." And so he tells him, but then Duncan ends up cutting off the head of the guy. He ends up beating the guy and cutting off his head. And then he hears like the detective pull up, and he's like, "Shit!" So he like makes a break for it back to his little barge that he's living in. And then the detective comes to accost him at the barge, and Duncan's like chilling out, pretending like he's been there all night, fucking his girlfriend / wife. And then Tessa comes out and like gives wine, like they just, she's wearing like, they're both wearing like night robes or whatever, like they've just been fucking. And the guy's like, "Oh, you think you've seen the last of me, but I'm gonna figure out what's going on with this whole shenanigans." And Duncan's like, "I don't know anything, I'm just a goofy American." It's pretty good. Which wraps up that episode. So we start off this episode with a heist. So this guy rolls in, he's talking to like this jewelry lady or whatever, and then he like puts down this canister of gas and everyone in the room dies. Right. Except him, of course, because he's an immortal. So he gets up, he opens the door, this dude in a gas mask comes in, they like are packing everything up in suitcases and whatnot. And then the guy's like, "You can take that dumb gas mask off, the gas is like dispersed." And he's like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah." So he takes it off, and then he dies. So what an asshole. So then we get like a funny, we go over to Darius, right, in the church, and we get this funny thing. This girl's like confessing that she's like hates her mom because her mom is dating her ex-boyfriend. Like the fuck. Anyway, same conversation about that, and then the next up in the confessional for Darius is dun dun dun. It's his name's Xavier. Xavier, the guy who robbed the police, and he's an immortal. And so he's taunting Darius, talking about he just killed 6 people, and he makes fun of his religion and spirituality and death and all that stuff. And then he leaves. A bit later on, Duncan comes over to play chess with Darius, which seems to be something they do quite often. And then the police detective comes in, and he is like, "Hey, we were doing the investigation, and there was like cameras showing that the guy who like walked in there and stole everything came immediately over here to talk to you." And the guy's like, "I can't say anything. He was a confessional." And they like get into an argument about being a priest and what that means and what. And Duncan's there, and the police detective's like, "Of course you're here, motherfucker." Blah blah blah. And Duncan just like tee-hee. Meanwhile, Tessa's trying to get some art objects for like the museum, right? Because she's a curator now. And then this guy knocks on the door, and dun dun dun, it's Xavier. Oh no! And he has an art piece that he wants to donate, and she's super excited about it, which we find out about because Duncan comes later. There's also like a little side story with Richie. Richie's always doing these like funny little side stories. So he's met this woman. He's super excited. She's super hot. They love banging each other. Anyway, at some point he brings her over, and then Tessa's like, "Oh, hey, it's you." And then the lady's like, "Oh, it's you, Tessa. Hello." And then later on, we're like, that's funny. They seem to hate each other or something. And so then, and you could just be like, women, right? But the show is well written, so that's not that's not the only reason why. The reason why is we find out later when Duncan's around that let's see, Duncan's around that the lady that's dating Richie is married. Oh no, and he's married to some super rich guy who's a patron of the museum and all this stuff. And she's like, you have to tell him. And Duncan's like, the fuck? And she's like, tee. Anyway, meanwhile, while this is going on the side, and sometime at the end, so Duncan tells Richie later. Richie doesn't believe it, but then finally Richie like sees her at the museum with her husband and like breaks it up with her. And then at like the end of the episode, Richie's like, "Am I an idiot?" And then Tessa's like, "No, I mean she was really passionately like in love with you, so you're not an idiot. She's just she married out of convenience. So she's not gonna like not be wealthy and rich." And then Richie's like, "Well, being a sex object for a hot older woman that's not a big of a deal." And it's like based. Anyway, okay, so that's the side story. We don't need to talk about that anymore. So meanwhile, while that's going on, the main story is Duncan has like a recollection when the police officer's telling about the gas attack. I think it looked like it was like World War II or no, World War One, because that's when they used mustard gas. He was like hanging out with the French army, I think, or some of the allies somewhere, and him and his like homie were doing stuff. And then there's like a mustard gas attack, and then Duncan like wakes up and sees that it's the Xavier guy, right? And he's wearing a gas mask, and then he's coming over to like cut his head off, and then a bunch of other soldiers with gas masks come over, and then he just like grabs whatever he was trying to steal and runs off. Duncan does some work. He tracks down an old friend, and when I say old, I mean like this guy is like in his 70s or 80s at this point, and he runs like a fencing business, and fencing is in not building fences, like getting illegal goods. And so he talks to him about the heist and everything that went on. He talks to him about the guy who died, who was like the mugster. And the guy thinks this is Duncan is Duncan's son, because there's no way Duncan could look that good and young at this point, which is pretty funny. Anyway, he sets up like a funeral for the guy because he's got like a kindly old lady mother who's like innocent in this whole matter, and like fuck those other people, right? They'll be fine. Anyway, so he sets it up with Darius. He does the thing. He gives the old woman a bunch of money and then talks to her about the situation and finds out that he had met this guy who he knows as Xavier, and where they had like met. And so then Duncan does a little he does a little like recon on it, and he finds the guy, and then they have like a chase through the city, and at some point the guy tosses like a nerve gas grenade at some construction workers, so Duncan has to go like save their asses, and he loses them. Meanwhile, so then Duncan's going back and forth with Darius. They all end up at the church and have like a conversation, and the guy like runs off again, and it's like, "You chased me, I got more grenades," where that came from. And so Duncan leaves him alone, but he keeps wanting to kill him, but the guy's kind of like a coward, right? So at some point, so then the guy's delivering the Ganon statue or whatever for Tessa's like exhibit, and then we find out that he's got a nerve gas like timing bomb in the thing, and he sets it up for like 9 o'clock because the event starts at 8, and the French are always late, or some commentary like that. Meanwhile, Duncan. Okay, so then the whole thing comes together. Duncan's hanging out, and the whole time the cops like bothering Duncan and talking to him, and so the event's going fine, and everyone's like having a good time. And Tessa mentions like all the wealthy like philanthropists and people that are there with all the diamonds and whatnot. And then Duncan the police officer comes up and is like, "Hey, I got to take you in. We found this grenade where you were like chasing that guy, and so you're in for questioning." And Duncan's like, "All right." So he tells Tessa he's got to go, and meanwhile she's kind of like feeding him information, but he doesn't know that the other guy's involved with this situation. But at some point, the police chief is like just telling him information about the case and about the guy they think, and about this guy from like who used like the similar attack where he used bombs to like kill everybody and steal everything and whatnot, and then he disappeared. And Duncan's like, "Holy shit, I figured it out." So then he like rolls out of the fucking car, races back to the museum, and the guy's like watching, and he's like, "Tee-hee, I'm gonna go in there and steal all that shit." And then, because that's his whole motivation, he just wants money. And then Duncan gets in there and is able to like disable the bomb like right before it goes off. And so then he meets up with the guy at the bars, and they have like a sword fight. But right when it seems like Duncan's about to win, Xavier like leaps into the water to like swim off, so Duncan chases after him. And then we go to the next day, and he like wanders up all wet and tired and stuff, and he's like, "I chased him down for like 2 miles, and then like there was like a bloody trail that kind of wandered off, and I lost track of him, so he'll be back someday." Dun dun dun. Which wraps up the episode. So episode 16 is kind of like a Phantom of the Opera, a ripoff. So Richie's taking Tessa and Duncan to the Paris Opera House because his new girlfriend is a backup singer for some lady who's practicing there. So they go there and they see this whole thing, and we get like a musical performance, and then the lady like stops it because she's super pissed off at that. They're not doing, like, the manager's not doing exactly what she wants, so they get into like a tussle. Well, they get into a verbal argument, not a tussle, up above like the stage or whatever, talking about lights and stuff like that. And then somebody shows up, and then Duncan feels it's an immortal, and then the manager gets like thrown down to the ground, and he dies, right? And so then Duncan is back at the barge, and there's like a police investigation, the whole thing, and then Duncan's back on it, and we get like a new policeman because the bald policeman's not there. It's like a more handsome policeman. I'm just laughing because it's like 16 episodes, and there's been like 5 different policemen. Like, these dudes don't even make it past like 3 episodes. Like, it's kind of ridiculous. Anyway, so rotating cast of police detectives in the world of Highlander. So then Duncan recalls that he met a guy. So he was like, back in the day, I don't know when, there was some like out in the woods somewhere with some like crazy like yokels or whatever in like the 1600s or whatever. They found a guy who's possessed by a demon, quote unquote, because every time they kill him, he comes back to life. And then they find him again, and then Duncan's like, oh, it's an immortal guy. And so Duncan goes and he like kills him, quote unquote, and says he's going to do something so that he never comes back to life, and like scares off the peasants. And then he just hangs out and waits for the guy to wake up. And the guy is like, it's like mutism. Like, he can't speak. He seems kind of like a learning disability, and maybe he's like a slightly, like, not slightly, but like severely autistic. Something like that, right? Because he just kind of grunts, and he doesn't seem to fully understand what's going on and stuff like that, right? But he's like a giant. And so Duncan ends up taking him to go stay at a monastery so he can be like one of them. And then so Duncan's like recalling the story to Tessa, and she's like, do you think it's the same guy? And he's like, it might be, but I don't know why he'd be here. Like, the dude lived in like caves, and I left him in like a monastery or whatnot. I need to check with Darius. So then obviously he does some investigation. He goes to talk to like the lady who's the singer, and she's got like these wildflowers, and someone just like left it for her. And then she's just like performing on her own, like thinking about stuff. And then the guy whose name is Ursa, he comes wandering up with flowers, and she's like, oh, you killed that guy. Why'd you kill that guy for? And Ursa's like, run, run. She's like, did you kill him for me? To protect me? And the guy kind of like, he hurt you or something, right? And then she's like, oh, I can use this. And she's like kind of going like crazy with like, there's like a whole subtext story that's kind of like briefly hinted at with various conversations, where she was like a famous singer, and then she became like not so famous, and then she like, her old manager like tracked her down and like gave her like a second chance, and then she was super grateful, and then now she's become super arrogant. And then Jenny, I think is her name, who's the girl that Richie's dating as the backup singer, she's a very good singer too, and she's been like working on her own music and stuff with like the band, and this lady's getting super jealous of like her as a young singer. And so after they have like a conversation, she gets Ursa to like kidnap her essentially. And Duncan's like talking to the police, and he's talking to Darius, and they're talking about the monastery that Ursa was at. It got like destroyed or something, and so he must have gone down, and it got like, I don't think it got like purposely destroyed so they could turn it into like a suburb of Paris, but it's like connected to the sewers and like the catacombs in Paris, like this whole thing that got built during the Black Plague to like keep the dead bodies out of the way or something. It's like a tourist thing you can go look at now. It's like an Indiana Jones. It's in a lot of shit because it's like, what the fuck? What is this crazy thing they built underneath Paris? Anyway, it's in like College Kings too, which is an erotic visual novel that is fantastic. But that's the most recent thing. But yeah, Indiana Jones, it's in like a bunch of stuff. I think it's in Broken Sword, which is an adventure game series that's pretty good. I can't remember if it's in Gabriel Knight. It might be. Anyway, back to Highlander. So Duncan goes down there to find him, and they get into like a little fight, but then Ursa like recognizes him and runs off. And then later on, as Duncan's doing like his investigation thing, he ends up back in the sewer because Jenny gets grabbed up by Ursa, and he's able to like track her down with Richie, and they rescue her. And then he confronts he comes back to the opera house when like the lady's telling Ursa she's super mad and that she loves him, but he clearly doesn't love her. Like she's using a lot of like crazy manipulation because she wants Jenny dead, right? And so then Duncan is like trying to convince Ursa that they're still friends and yada yada. And then the lady like runs up and like hits Duncan and he like pushes her away and she does this dramatic like fall. And so Ursa pulls out his fucking giant meat cleaver, a sword, and starts fighting Duncan. And then we get like a cool battle with them going back and forth. And Duncan's trying not to hurt him. And he's like climbing up and they get to like the roof of the opera house. And they're fighting on the roof of the opera house. And this lady's just like watching like a crazy person. And eventually Ursa like slips and he falls off the edge. Duncan's like, fuck. And so he goes down there and he gets like into it with the lady. And he sees Ursa walking up, and he gets her to admit that she thinks he's an idiot and doesn't really care for him, and she's just using him for violence. And then Ursa's like, huh? And then she like freaks out, and then she runs, and then Ursa's like trying to chase after her a little bit. It's not like to hurt her, it doesn't seem. He's just like, there's like a car racing down the street, and then she runs out into the road and gets hit and dies. And then Ursa like picks her up, and Duncan's like, there's nothing we can do, man, she's dead. And he's like, "Rrr," and he like wanders off. And I don't know what he does with that body. He just like wanders up, and then it's like later Duncan's taking Ursa to like the abbey that got rebuilt somewhere else, and he's like, you can stay here with these guys, yada yada, and listen to your music and have a good time and be safe because it's sacred ground and everything. And Ursa's like, McLeod, and McLeod's like, yeah man, I'll miss you too. And then the guy goes off with one of the like monks to like do whatever crazy monk thing he's gonna do, and that's the episode. And it was like, huh. Whatever happened to that lady? The dead one? I don't know. Guess we'll never find out. All right, so in this one, this episode 17, I think, we finally meet one of McLeod's old flames. And not like that crazy girl who was trying to hook up with Richie and then kill her. This is like straight up a girl that he kind of was romantically engaged with. Anyway, we get this cute little story. It's this pretty Parisian woman, and she's hanging out with some old doctor guy, and they get into some sort of argument about him getting older and her not being as old or whatnot. And then she kind of storms off. And then someone comes in and shoots him and like sets his whole like lab on fire or whatnot. Meanwhile, the woman bumps into Duncan on the street after Duncan's talking to Darius about some random nonsense. And it's like, oh, hey, it's my old flame from this thing. And they chat for a bit, and she explains like the whole situation. And so he's like, well, come stay with us. It could be like, I can't remember the guy's name, ex-boyfriend. An ex-boyfriend is like an immortal that she's been trying to hide from for like the last 100 years or whatever, but he might be back here in Paris doing shenanigans or not. So he takes her back, and then she's like in the shower when Tessa gets home, and Tessa like runs home, and she's talking about like going on a vacation, all this stuff. And then you hear like the Parisian girl, like, oh, hey, Duncan, something. And he's like, yeah, I'll bring you a towel. And Tessa's like, what the fuck? And Duncan's like, calm it down, woman. So then she comes out. Richie gets goggly eyes at her because she's wearing like just a towel. And then after Duncan kind of explains the situation, and we get a flashback, we see he's just like riding along in like France at some point, and then he gets attacked by some bandits, and he kills the bandits or drives them off. And then he senses the immortals, and he breaks into like this house, and there's like the immortal lady, who's the French lady, she's helping this woman give birth. And so they stand there and watch the birth happen, and then he goes outside, and then she comes out and she's like, all right, well, I'm not going to fight you. I'm not into that kind of thing, so go ahead and like take my head or whatever. And he's like, nah, I'm not going to do that. That's fine. Anyway, so back to the present, he gets accosted by Bald Detective, who's back. Awesome, Bald Detective's back. And he continues to be a total a-hole. In that he is like, oh, I'm going to get you arrested because you're harboring a criminal. And it's like, and Duncan's like, you have a warrant? Like, what are you talking about? And it's like, oh, we found the neighbors were saying these two were fighting, and we found him dead with a 9mm shot. And then she had a 9mm in her house, and we're going to do ballistics. And if she's tied together, then we're going to get you too. And Duncan's like, okay, good luck with that. So now they got to get her like out of the country, right? Because they got to like find like somebody and get her like some fake paperwork and get her out of there so she can hide from the police until they like, give up on her little search, and then she can like wander back or whatever. Meanwhile, Beck's boyfriend shows up, and he is a real swarmy guy. Like, because they go over to like Darius to like hang out for a little bit, because she can't really stay with Duncan at this juncture because the cops are going to be like looking around for her. But then they run into this guy, and they go back and forth, and we learn that this guy and her like hooked up, and they were like together for like 100 years or something. And then she realized he was like a total a-hole and just hated, like, she loves helping mortals, and she's like, her whole thing is like doing research on like ways to like help people be healthier and stronger and all this stuff, and all this like very philanthropy kind of stuff. And this guy, all he wanted to do was like go to Brazil and like start empire and have them worship him as a god. And so she's not into that. And then they go back and forth about that whole situation. And he's like, "You are mine." And Duncan's plays, he like tips his hat, milady, and is like, and it's like, she doesn't belong to you. She's her own person. And they go back, and she just stands there like a wilting flower and just like watches the men like fight over her. And she's like, teehee. There's a lot of like hints that they had like something going on. And then like, what's the point of like the mortal situation? Like sometimes it gets so sad. And then she also like compliments Tessa a lot about how like nice of a relationship they have and how lucky Tessa is. And Tessa's like, okay, this is like getting real awkward. And she's like, yeah, so I know Duncan's been around for a minute. So his body count's pretty high. But I never met one of these chicas because they're all dead except for you apparently, and there's more. Don't worry, there's like 6 seasons of this. And so she's like, I don't know how I feel about all that, and then he's like, I get it, but like, don't worry about me. I'm not going to do anything yet. Anyway, we get some more back and forth. At some point, Duncan and ex-boyfriend like fight it out for a little bit before they like skedaddle. And then there's a whole thing where Richie goes and finds some like kid who died when they were 8, and they like steal their paperwork. And she's like ready to go, and they're at a cafe, like her, Tessa, and Duncan. And he's like, "Let me take you to the airport, just in case." And the whole time they're being like tracked by the police. And she's like, "No, I got this. I gotta, I can take care of myself. I've been doing it for hundreds of years." And he's like, "Okay." And as soon as she steps out, the police grab her. And the ex-boyfriend shows up and starts fighting the police. And so Duncan comes out, and it becomes like this, like, it's one of those, it's not this humorous, but it's almost like, it's like that thing in like old cartoons where you'd have like multiple rooms and people are like walking in one room and then walking out a different room, and there's like 5 groups of people chasing each other through this thing, and it's like comedy ensues. Only it's like the police chasing and the immortals are fighting each other, but then they all end up down in like a subway, like in the underground in the subway, and they're like, he's like, "Get out of here," and he starts fighting Dude Meister with like his sword, and they're fight, and then they both get like down on the tracks, and then the guy gets like shocked because he steps on like the 3rd rail or whatever, and then he ends up with like his head perfectly aligned with like the rail. So we can get a nice clean incision there. And then Duncan's like stuck for a minute. He's like, "Oh no, here comes the subway train," or metro, or whatever they call it in France. And so he like is finally able to get like his shoe off or whatever, and he pops out of the subway just in time for the guy to get his head cut off, and then Duncan to get all his like sweet quickening and whatnot. And then then we get the goodbye scene where it's like, "Okay, cool, well, take care of yourself. I'll see you when I see you." Good stuff. Episode 18 kicks off with a pretty awesome, like, and kind of ridiculous prison escape, sort of. So there's this guy, he's in the back of like a transport vehicle for prisons, and he beats the shit out of like the guard in there, and then he like kicks his way out the back door, climbs up on the roof, and somehow the guy who's driving the vehicle just doesn't realize the open doors that you can clearly see from the side. Whatever. Anyway, he jumps onto what do you even call this kind of thing? Like a car transport vehicle, like one of those big semi-trucks. And then he climbs into one of the cars on the bottom, or like the car closest to the exit. And then he unhooks it, and he gets in there, and he hot wires it, and then he drives the fuck off. And it's like, cool. Later, Tessa, Richie, and Duncan are going to the circus. And when they're at the circus, Duncan recognizes this chick who's like the trapeze artist or whatever. And so they meet up with her afterwards. Oh no, so while he has, when does he have the recall? He has a recall at some point of him like hanging out with this chick like back in the day in like Victorian England, I want to say. Anyway, they're like fucking around, and clearly they're like a couple, and after he gets woken up in the middle of the night by some guy who's like, "You stole this person's stuff and this person's stuff," and then he fights it's just some random guy. He fights that guy, and then he escapes because she's a thief and she like set him up. So he's like, "Fuck this bitch." Anyway, so they go meet up with her after the circus and have like a little chit chat, and she tries to like get all over him, and like she's very handsy and like wants a kiss and stuff, and Tessa's right there, and she's pissed. Obviously, this is like 2nd episode in a row where she's had to deal with like one of Cloud's like ex-girlfriends. Like he's not super happy about it. Previous ex-girlfriend was much less crazy. This chick is out of her fucking mind. Anyway, he's like, Richie gets like real hot and bothered about her existence, and so gives her his business card so that she can like come stalk Duncan, clearly, because he's just like, his business card just has the address of like the barge they're all living in. So she's chilling on her own, and then Zach, who's the guy who escapes from the prison, her name's Amanda, shows up, and he's about to like cut her head off, but she's like, "No, I can give you Duncan MacLeod." He's like, "Duncan MacLeod, I hate that fucking guy." And it's like, why does he hate that guy? Because she always liked Duncan better than him, and they were like dating for a while, I guess, until she got tired of him and faked her own death and blamed it on him. What a crazy bitch. Like, Jesus. Okay, so then she goes and she like fucks around with Tessa some more, and then Duncan shows up and he's like, "Get the fuck out of here!" And she's like, "Oh, you have to come protect me. Something. This guy is after me. I don't know who he is. Blah blah blah." So Duncan goes to like check it out at the circus, and he gets like ambushed by this guy who, meanwhile, while they're doing that shit, he goes and gets himself like a sword. He lost his sword because he's been in prison for like 50 years or whatever, and so he heads to this sword guy, and he buys like he might be Spanish because he buys this like special rapier. I think it's a rapier that's made of like in Toledo with like Damascus steel or whatever, and then he kills the guy because just to prove how evil he is, right? Anyway, so he goes, he fights Duncan, then all like the circus rubes or whatever like show up. I don't think they're called rubes, what the carnies, all the circus guys like show up, and so they have to like depart, and then they have a little more conversation. And back at the barge, Duncan and Tessa and Richie are talking about the lady, and Duncan's like, they know each other, I just gotta figure out how. And so Tessa goes and talks to like an old circus agent, and she mentions Amanda, and he's like, "Oh, Amanda, yeah, she's dead, but look at this." And he shows her like a poster, and it has Amanda and the Zach guy, and so it's like, I knew they were working together. Meanwhile, Amanda and Zach are like hanging out, and they go to like some museum, and Richie's like following after them, and she recognizes Richie's there, but she doesn't say anything. And they talk about stealing like this ancient book so they can like pawn it and then go off on their merry way or whatever. And then he like threatens her some more about Duncan and setting him up and whatnot. Later, Duncan gets accosted by, he meets up with her for some reason to like call her out on her bullshit, and then he gets like jumped by a bunch of carnies who like throw a net over him and take him back to the circus so that her and her like boyfriend now can go and like rob the museum. And so while they're doing all sorts of like cool heist stuff, like shooting a crossbow bolt with like a grappling hook across, and then like trapezing over this thing, and then doing some fucking like Mission Impossible style, like lowering a rope down so she doesn't touch the ground kind of cool stuff. He is doing circus tricks to prove to like the circus freaks that he is like one of them, so they'll let him go or something. But then he like takes the power out of the circus and flees over to like the museum where they're all hanging out. What's going on up there? Okay. Sorry, I'm like trying to get on this base, and there's like a cone, but it's like very far away from like where it should be. Okay, anyway, so he ends up heading back over to the museum, and when he gets there, he turns the lights on, and he's like, ta-da! And they're like, fuck! And he's like, oh, hey, maybe I'll turn you guys, maybe I won't. Let me flip this coin. He just flips the coin right into the ground, so it sets off the alarm, and he's like, tee-hee, tee-hee. And then so he wanders the fuck out of there, and then they grab the book, and they make a break for it. And then, you know, in some like cafe or whatever they're hiding out in, he's like, you betrayed me. And so he pulls out his sword, and she pulls out her sword, and then he pulls out like a gun, and then Duncan like rolls in and slaps the gun out of his hand and is like, stop being a bitch. And then he pulls out his sword, and then Duncan pulls out his sword, and then Duncan and him start fighting, and Duncan's about to beat him, but then she comes up from behind and like cuts his head off, and then like shrugs at him, and Duncan's like, Lord Christ. So then she gets like all the quickening magic, and then he like grabs her and is like, and she's like, come away with me, my lover, blah blah blah. And he's like, fuck no, you're a crazy bitch, absolutely not. And she's like, whatever. And she is about to like wander off, and he's like, hold up, give me that book, bitch. And she's like, okay, tee-hee. And that is the end of the episode. And that is not the last time we'll see Amanda. I guarantee you this. So we start off, and I thought it was like a past thing, but it's a present. And then we get the sexy chick, and she's banging this like old dude. And then he kind of wanders off, and she's looking for an earring of hers, and she opens up like this secret passage that leads into like all this beautiful art and whatnot. And then he comes in, he's like, what happened here? And she's like, I don't know, I was just like fucking around, and it opened up, so I came to see what was inside. And it's like, curiosity got the cat. And that's what's gonna happen here. But she sees a painting, and like, wasn't this stolen last week? And he's like, oh, don't worry about that. And he starts making out there, and then he kills her. Later on, Richie gets fish at a restaurant, and he's super pissed off because he ordered fruit, and then this lady nearby comes over and is like, what did you order? And he's like fruité or like fruité or whatever, and she's like, that's fish, tee-hee, tee-hee. And so she tries some of this fish, and they flirt, and then she takes off. Later than that, Duncan gets tickets to go from like a buddy of his, take Tessa and Richie over to this like fashion show, and we get there, and there's this immortal guy, and this is a guy from before, so the one who killed the girl. And then the Maya lady's there. She's the model that Richie met at the restaurant. And so he flirts with her a little bit. Duncan introduces the guy to like Tessa and everybody. And then Richie like asks this chick out, and she's like not that interested. She just goes with the other guy, and then he gets kind of mad, and then they leave. And on the way out, they see these police come over, and we find out that the lady, Cynthia, I think is her name. Cynthia, the lady who died. There was some crazy accident. Her her roommate is Maya, and that she's dead, right? They found her in some alleyway or whatever, so they want to question her, and then the rich guy, I can't remember what his name is like, no. And then we get like a little flashback from Duncan after he, Richie's like, can't you see that guy's a creep? He totally killed that lady. And then McLeod's like, stay the fuck out of it. It's none of your business. You're just jealous, which is true, which is a fact. Anyway, so Duncan gets a flashback, and we see Duncan and this guy. They're like talking about how this guy's like a jewel thief, but also he's like hangs out with nobles and shit. And then they're just like fucking around at this bordello or whatever. And when they head out, they like just run into some random guards who take a shot at them. But this is like old enough where they have to like reload, and it takes like 30 seconds to reload. So then they come out and they sword fight with their bayonets and whatnot. Duncan and his homie fight with swords, and then they try to fight with their bayonets to beat the shit out of him, and then they like make this like daring escape by jumping on horses from like a second-story window. It was cool. It's just kind of like, what? Why? And there's a midget in the scene for some reason. Cool, badass. So, all right. So they move forward. So we go back, and then most of this episode is Richie trying to get with this girl, and her just like rejecting him completely. And then, but he feeds her with like suspicion, and then she's like hanging out at the guy's like studio, getting dressed, and he's telling her how great she is and like flirting with her. And then she finds the earring of her like roommate, and is like, oh, Richie, that's right. So she sneaks back, tells him, he's like, hey, you got to go to the police. And she's like, they're not going to believe me. Plus my career, obviously. And it's like, hey, you dumb bitch. Not him. Not Maya. Richie. Richie's the dumb bitch. She's not interested in you. Move the fuck on, and leave well enough alone, because you're causing all these problems. Like literally, you caused every single problem in this episode to happen. So anyway, I mean, he didn't kill the girl initially, but if he just like shut his fucking mouth, then like there would be no more issues. Okay, so Duncan pretty much tells him that Richie wants to like train in sword fighting, and Duncan's like, hey, if you ever run into an immortal, just shoot him with a gun as many times as possible, and then run the fuck away. And then a little bit later, Richie's playing like chess or checkers or something with Tessa, and he gets a call, and it's from the immortal guy, and he's like, I got your girlfriend. If you want to see her, you better get your ass over here and come alone. So then Richie does this like really sneaky thing. He buys like a cane, and then he gets some dark sunglasses, and he goes for like a little blind walk, and eventually he runs into like a policeman who helps him, and he steals his gun. And I was like, that was sneaky. Also, that's going to get you in a lot of trouble. So he heads over to the guy's place, pulls the gun on him immediately, then Maya comes in, and then the police come in. Oh, I forgot to mention, sorry, this is my second time recording this because I recorded it incorrectly the first time. There was a whole scene where Richie goes to like break into the guy's place, and the guy catches him, and he like lights him on fire, and then Duncan has to go like make peace, and he's like, hey man, you owe me one, and the guy's like, yeah, I guess I do owe you one. And then we get a flashback where we find out that the guy had promised Duncan he wouldn't steal this specific necklace from like the Duchess that Duncan's like boinking at the time. And the guy like went against that and stole the necklace, so they had a sword fight, and then Duncan had a chance to like cut his head off, but he let him live. And the guy was like, I guess I owe you one. And Duncan's like, that's fucking right. So the guy's like, all right, I'll leave Richie alone. But he doesn't. So Richie ends up in Paris prison, and then he's like, I want my bail. And the lawyer that came in is like, what the fuck's bail? And Duncan's like, this is Paris, motherfucker. Like, this isn't America. And the guy's like, okay, yeah, we'll go talk to the judge about getting you out of here before trial. And he's like, all right, let's go talk to him. He's like, oh, he's on vacation. We'll get around to it later. And Duncan's like, stay the fuck here. At that point, Richie's like, you gotta go check on Maya. She mentioned the earring to your buddy. And so Duncan heads over there. Meanwhile, the guy is questioning her about the earring and about everything, and she's getting super scared because he's getting super creepy, so she stabs him and runs. And then he pulls out his sword and starts chasing her. And then Duncan shows up and does this like epic backflip. It's not a backflip. He like jumps off the second story to the first floor of like this guy's like studio / lofty apartment area. And then the guy's like, that's pretty dramatic, McLeod. You've always been dramatic, McLeod, which is like facts. All right, so they have a sword fight, and it's pretty good. Duncan loses his sword for a second, does like a flip over like a stairwell, and then they eventually, they go at each other, and Duncan gets his head, and then Duncan's like super sad after the quickening because obviously he like lost a friend, even though and it's like he's sad because the friend went like kind of evil and started just like killing people. Like fuck that, man, that's ridiculous. Like stealing is one thing, but come on. Anyway, so the ending, we get Richie apologizing to Duncan for causing all these problems and everything, and Duncan's like, hey, it is what it is. People change. And he's like, whatever happened to that girlfriend of yours? And Richie's like, oh, she ran off with like a Formula One driver to Monaco. And Duncan's like, you dumb motherfucker. So we start off this next episode with a guy like praying to God or whatever inside this like, I thought it was a church, but it's just like a castle or like a fortress, whatever. It's a Templar hideout or whatever. Anyway, and then we see the same guy, and he is hanging out at some bar, flirting with some chick, and who's clearly like an escort or whatever, and then he gets into a fight with some pimp-looking dude. Well, he doesn't look like a pimp, like an American pimp, but he's like a Parisian pimp, so he's wearing like a suit and looks swarmy. Anyway, so he gets into a fight with these guys. He's like an ex-SAS guy, so he knows how to fight, but it doesn't stop him from getting stabbed. And then he like wanders out until the streets, and then ends up at this like Templar building or whatever. And at that point, McLeod senses him because dun dun dun, he's an immortal, but he just became an immortal, and this guy's like out of his fucking rocker. So because McLeod tries to do the whole thing where it's like, hey man, just so you know, this is the deal, this is what's going on, and the guy's like, I have been called by God, you're the angel Gabriel, and he like runs off, right? And so McLeod, before this guy like wakes up as an immortal, he stole like his identification or whatever, so he's able to like look him up, and he finds out that he's this British guy and he's a member of SAS and all this stuff, and he's like, I gotta take care of. It's like, man, there's got this crazy guy running around, and because he did some digging and he finds out this guy failed like a psych test, and he was kicked out of SAS like recently because he's like losing his fucking mind. Which is a pretty normal thing, to be completely honest. Normally, they wouldn't kick him out of the military altogether. I don't know how the British military works, but I know in the United States military, if you can't hang because of like some crazy stuff, they like separate you with benefits if you're like real crazy. But if you're just like not stable enough, they just kick you down to like infantry because no one gives a fuck how stable you are there. Anyway. Okay, where were we? Oh, yeah. So then we spend the rest of the episode with Duncan trying to track this guy down. Another character that pops up is Tessa's like old middle school friend, who is clearly not French, even though Tessa's clearly, I don't know. I feel like she's French, or she's supposed to be, or maybe not. I don't know. She's got like a very thick accent. Anyway, but this lady's like not responding to Tessa, even though they're both live in Paris at this point, and Tessa's finally got a hold of her, and so she wants to like reach out, and so she's gonna bring Duncan to like introduce her and meet her, and her name's like Elaine or something. Anyway, so SAS guy. So then we get like Elaine, and she's lied to Tessa about being like a interior designer, and because in reality she's a high-end escort, and she's fucking some politician guy. And so he leaves her place, and then the SAS guy, who's like lost his mind, probably it seems like he was like physically and emotionally abused a lot by like his stepfather or his foster father. I think he's his stepfather. And like the ways of being like a lunatic Christian. And so he, that's where he gets a lot of this from. And then he finds this politician guy, and he goes into like an elevator with him, and he like kills him while he's like reading Leviticus over his body. And so when Tessa and Duncan show up, they find the dead body, and then they go upstairs, and the lady's like, oh, I don't know who that is. That's so crazy. This thing's happening. And they're like, hey, you want to stay with us? She's like, no, I'm fine. I mean, it's like, I didn't know this guy or anything. And then Duncan sees like a flower arrangement, and it's like a bunch of like pink roses or something. And he remembers that like on the dead body when they found it, the guy was like holding like a pink rose, and she's like, huh. So he said, hey Tessa, you're a friend there? And also he like asked around, and one of the neighbors was like, oh yeah, that guy came around all the time, he was a regular, wink wink. And Duncan's like, oh, she's a prostitute, got it. So he tells Tessa that. She doesn't believe him at first, and he like overwhelms her with evidence, and she's like, oh shit, my friend's like a prostitute, why would she lie to me? And he gets super mad about it and super concerned. But they go to like confront her again about the situation, and when they do, I'm trying to remember if the guy kills anybody in between here or there. I don't remember if he does. I think he does. He kills like another guy who's like, oh no, he finds the woman that he was like flirting with, who was like a prostitute, and he gets her into like the back of a car by killing like some guy that was gonna like take her somewhere, and then killing her as well. Okay, so they get to the place. They get to the lady's place, and Tessa and her start having a conversation about it, and they have like a really dramatic conversation about her giving up, and like, I was a waitress, and I was like living out of like a nurse's or like a maid's shower, which is just like a sink. And I was getting real tired of it, and this escort thing's like working out pretty well, and she's super wealthy and has a nice apartment and everything, but like she can't get out of it because like pimps are like, they don't fuck around, right? Meanwhile, Duncan's like paroling the area trying to find this guy, and he senses him, and he starts to chase after him, and then some of like the pimp's men, it seems like, they come and accost them, and then because the guy's like ex-SAS, and because Duncan's fucking Duncan McLeod, they beat the shit out of these guys, but it allows the crazy guy to like get away, right? So now they're super concerned. They get the lady to come like stay with them, and they're like trying to convince her to like leave and start over again, and she's having a lot of qualms about that. But finally, they convince her to like go back to her place and get her stuff, and Duncan's having like a real heart-to-heart with her about moving around and changing her identity and just starting over, and she's like, you seem to know a lot about this, and he's like, you'd be surprised. It's a good motherfucker's like 400 years old. Anyway, so we go from there. Okay, so then she's in her place like packing up whatever, and then her pimp like shows up, and then he like pulls a gun on Duncan, and Duncan beats the shit out of him and like throws the gun away. And then the guy, they leave, and they're walking down the stairs to get out of there. And then Duncan like senses the crazy guy being there, so he races back upstairs. Meanwhile, the pimp is like gotten up, got his gun, and gets in the elevator with the crazy guy because they know he's crazy. And the guy like strangles him out. And then Duncan gets up there and misses him. And the girl, like, because they hear her shout, she comes up as well. And so they gotta sneak out of there. And he's like, get in the car and get the fuck out of here. And so they head back over to Tessa. Meanwhile, this guy is like praying to whoever, whatever devil he's like possessed with in his brain. And he's like, I must kill Duncan MacLeod. Duncan MacLeod is the child of the devil, yada, yada, yada. And so he goes to like harass him at the bars, and Tessa's there. And then Tessa uses some like real quick like acting work to convince this guy that she's like Mary Magdalene and she's a sinner, but then Duncan had her like held prisoner, and that God sent her like him as an angel to like rescue her from Duncan MacLeod. And he's like, I will go kill him for you and save your soul. And she's like, thank you so much. And so she gets him to like go away. So Duncan and Elaine show up. And Tessa's like drawing a picture of the guy because that's how she copes with like all this trauma, this like being an immortal wife, an immortal's wife. She draws pictures of all this crazy shit. And so they like hug it out, and she's like, no, I'm fine. I tricked him, yada, yada. He kept saying something about Jack Morley, and then Duncan's like, I already know where he's at. I'll be back. And so he is over there, and this guy's dressed up in like full Templar armor at this juncture and has like a battle axe and a sword. And so Duncan goes in there, and the guy like tries to ambush him, but it's Duncan fucking MacLeod. And so they start fighting, and he knocks the axe out of the hand, and then he fights, the guy pulls the sword out, and then they fight. And then Duncan like knocks him into this well, and as he's coming out of the well, he's like, there's nothing you can do. I'm immortal. And Duncan's like, not for long. And it cuts that motherfucker's head off, and gets like the power of the quickening. So afterwards, him and the whole time Richie's been like somewhere. They said where, but they said it like real quick, and I wasn't paying that much attention. So he's like on vacation away from like his vacation in Paris. Anyway, so Duncan and Tessa having a conversation. We find out that Elaine just like pieced out and didn't leave any return address or forwarding or anything like that. And Tessa's like really concerned about the whole situation. And Duncan's like, hey man, sometimes you just need a fresh start. You just got to like let go of everything and start from scratch. And maybe someday she'll reach out to you. And then Tessa's like, oh, fine, I don't know, fuck it. And then they walk off. Which wraps up that episode. So the penultimate episode of this season is a fucking siege. God, this show's so awesome. All right, so we get a shot of this derpy-looking dude who's American, I want to say, who is trying to hook up with this French lady, and then she's like, no, I'm not a whore, something, and then she like gets out of the car, he like kicks her out of the car because he's an asshole, and they're out in like the woods or something, and so she starts walking off, and he goes after her, and he's like, no, you're so beautiful, I love you, blah, 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 and then she starts kissing him again because she's a dummy. She's young. She's not a bitch because, she's just like, you got hormones and you're young, you make a lot of bad decisions. That's normal stuff for boys and girls. Anyway, not this guy though, he's an asshole. So then he rapes her, and then she wanders off and runs into her like a dad who's like her adopted dad because of course he's an immortal, and he wants vengeance. And then we get some like background of him and Duncan knowing each other from like back in the day a little bit, and how this guy was like a general, but now he's a colonel in the modern day because this is like during the French Revolution or something. I know they're wearing red coats again, or they're wearing red uniforms, so I assume that's the British because I think the French wore blue. But I am not a European history buff. I do not really care for most European history. It's kind of boring. And it doesn't have anything to do with my people, which are all, there's Italians, but before that it was all African and Middle Eastern and Asian. But anyway, so Tessa knows this diplomat guy. He's an American diplomat. He owns like this house in France, or this chateau or something, it seems. His wife has passed on, but Tessa, like, when she was younger, she was like a governess for this family or something. I didn't catch exactly what the relationship was, but they like know each other. So they're coming to visit this nice place, and they're like all laughing and having a good time. And then Duncan like feels the immortal thing, so he heads outside to see what's going on, and he runs into the general, and he's like, General, and he's like, I'm a colonel now. And then we have a little conversation, and the guy, he wants revenge for his daughter's rape. And so he wants, I think his name's Mark, the rape boy. And at the same time, him and Richie are like not getting along because, Richie's like a good dude. He's like a criminal with like a heart of gold. And this other guy is just like a rapist. So they definitely do not get along. So they banter a little bit and then talk about justice and how let the police handle it. And then like they're out in the boonies and like who's going to believe them versus like some rich diplomat, which is fair. And then Duncan is like, and the guy's like, I'm going to come get this guy whether you want me to or not. And so then Duncan goes inside and gets everybody gathered together, and they go to like an more easily defensible part of the chateau, which is like another mansion, because they were like in mansion part 1, so they escaped to like mansion part 2. And meanwhile, the colonel, he gets his like men, and he has like a whole bunch of homies that he served a bunch of wars with, for the French, I guess. And now they are like retired out here in the boondocks of France, just kind of doing their own business. And so that's fun. They got like a Band of Brothers situation going on. Anyway, so they all are over here. They all come, and then we get like the siege. So then Duncan and crew, they like heat up oil, and they find like a flamethrower. they get like some razor blades for like a saw blades and stuff. They like puke and they set up like traps in this place and stuff. And so then they get assaulted by these guys who like climb up to the roof and then like what's it called, rappel down and all this stuff, and we get some shenanigans. And at some point Richie like figures out this guy actually did rape the girl, because it wasn't like he was like lying about it the whole time. And they start wrestling, and then Duncan has to like rescue them, because a guy with a machine gun comes in, and he kills him with like a throw of like a saw blade, which is badass. And then we get a lot of that. We get a lot of like dudes falling into traps. Like Tessa pours hot oil over one guy. The diplomat guy like burns somebody to death with like a flamethrower. And then right when it seems like Richie's going to get killed and the guy's going to get grabbed, the general like whistles for some reason. And so everybody like just vamooses back to his location. And then we get, I think her name's Lori, the rape victim. She's over here. She's like, the fuck are you doing? And he's like, get out of here, you scamp. And she's like, Dad, you got to stop this right now. This is not called for. Like, he needs to go to jail. He needs to not, like, whatever this thing you're doing, you're not doing it for me or because you love me or because my mom's honor, because she promised to protect me. To mother, but you're doing this because you just want vengeance, and you're like an angry old soldier, and you just love doing this crazy shit. We also get a flashback at some point in this whole thing where Duncan's remembering this other time this guy did like the same thing, only that time before the guy was like innocent, he killed, while this guy's 100% guilty. Anyway, so then at some point the rape comes like clean, or it doesn't come clean, but like Richie like calls him out, and then the dad like calls him out, and then the son is like, but you know, she was asking for it. And then Tessa's like, holy shit. I can't believe you just said that. And I was like, damn, man. That's fucked up. And so the dad is like, unacceptable. And so then the dad and the boy like sneak out of there, because they're gonna like, you know, they don't want to endanger Tessa, Duncan, and Richie. So they make a break for it, and then Duncan has to go rescue them because they run immediately into like trouble. And so he does some like Metal Gear Solid shit where he's like jumping from trees and like sneaking up behind guys, taking their guns, and then shooting other dudes. And then Diplomat gets shot like in the chest, and I'm like, that motherfucker's dead. But no, he's fine. I mean, he's not fine, but he's not doing well. But he's alive. And so Duncan carries him back, and they're like, we got to get out of here right now. And like, I got to take care of this because this guy's going to die in a hospital. So he tries calling General. Oh yeah, and the General locked up his daughter in like a shed so she wouldn't get in the way. And he's like, hey man, you got to cut this out like right now. This is ridiculous. Like, you've lost men. Like men of yours have like died. And he's like, no, Duncan, this will only end in one way. You give me that guy, or I die. And Duncan's like, fuck. Anyway, so then Duncan's like, I gotta go take care of this shit. And so he goes and he like Metal Gear Solid some more dudes, and eventually gets to the general, and it's like, and the general's like, I'm gonna shoot you and take your head. And Duncan's like, you would never do that, you asshole. And the guy's like, all right, you called me out. So they pull swords and start fighting. Meanwhile, Mark tricks Richie into like turning his back on him, which stupid ass, and like bonks him on the head with like a frying pan or something, and stakes his gun, and then he runs out. And then Richie goes after him and finds, again, I think it's Lori, or the rape victim, locked in the thing, and he rescues her. And then she's like, way to go stop my dad. And he's like, oh yeah, you're the girl, okay, come on, let's go. And so then right when Duncan's about to cut off the guy's head, he's like, I don't want to do this. And then Mark shows up. Oh yeah, Mark's the rapist, I'm pretty sure that's his name. And he's like, he's gonna shoot the guy, and then Lori shows up and he's gonna shoot her instead because he's an asshole. And then Duncan gets in the way of that, and then Lori pulls out like a gun and shoots him when like the dad is like, no, Lori. And then so Mark dies, and it was like, all these people died, and for not, they should have just handed him over initially, which yes, they should 100% should have just done that. That's hindsight, but at the same time, I'm like, wait, you raped a chick? Like, country justice away. Like, I'm 100% for that. They should have just handed him over and been like, go nuts, torture him to death or whatever, fuck that guy. Raping chicks, thinking he's better than everyone else. Fuck that guy. If I was his dad, I would have been like, yep, go nuts. I'll see him in heaven or whatever. All right, or hell, right, at that point. So let's see what's going on next. Oh, okay. So then the general and Lori like hug it out, and then Duncan just looks like sadly onward. A bit later, a doctor comes to get the diplomat. He says he's going to be okay, sure, and then, no one's told him that Mark's dead yet, because you know that's not good for his psyche. And then Richie is like, says something about like, what do you think happened to those guys? And Duncan's like, they probably ran for it. We're not going to see them again, like, ever. and then do you think something? And Duncan's like, we never forget. And then Tessa gets in the car and they ride off into the final episode. All right, time for the final episode of season 1, and this one is a banger. So it starts off, and how does it start off? We get a shot of Darius hanging out at his church, and then we see this like shady as fuck group of dudes like roll on up, and then meanwhile Duncan is fucking Tessa. It's a perfect whole, right? So the beginning of the first season, the beginning of the first episode starts with them fucking, and this last episode, it also starts with them fucking. Perfect. And then they get interrupted just like the other time, but this time it's with, I think his name's Hugh, and he's a charming guy. He kind of looks like one of the doctors from that show, Doctor Who. I've never seen Doctor Who. I think I watched like 5 minutes of it once, like in passing while I was like at a buddy's house and they were watching it, and I like came into the room and made some offhanded comment to get a laugh, and then I left. I think I saw like the little robot guys. Anyway, it looks like one of those guys with like he's got like crazy hair and everything, and he kind of sounds, I don't know if he sounds British, kind of does. Anyway, so he shows up and he's like, "What up, man? I just wanted to check on you." And Duncan's like, "Why? What's going on?" And he's like, "A bunch of like our friends, like random immortals that I know have just like disappeared. Like it's not like they got killed. I didn't feel, they just kind of like mysteriously disappeared." And then they both get concerned about Darius, and so they head over there and they find that Darius is dead. He's got his head cut off in the church. And it's like, the fuck? Immortals can't kill people in churches. Like, what's going on here? And so they start to try to investigate it, and they find this like hotel or apartment with a bunch of like these dudes in it, and they start fighting with them, and then we get like a cool fight on the stair. There's a lot of fighting in this episode. They fight on the stairway, and then they chase them down, and then they split up, which is always a bad idea. You don't split the party. Don't forget that. And so they split up, and then Duncan tracks down one guy. He sees a bunch of dudes hopping into a van. So then he like chases the van down and pulls a guy like out of the van. And then the van like tries to hit him, and then he chases the guy down some more. And then he finally gets him, and the guy stabs himself with a knife. And Duncan's like, "Fuck!" And then he like looks at his wrist, and he's got some sort of like mark on it. And then Duncan like thinks back, because there was a time when him and Hugh were like hanging out like back in the day, and they got into like a sword fight, and there was also like they saw this symbol before, and he's like, "The fuck is this symbol?" And so he goes back, or then he tries to meet back up with Hugh, and Hugh's like gone. He's like, "They fucking got him, fuck." And so he heads back to the barge, where he's like hanging out with Tessa and Richie, and he's looking through all his like stuff and doing like all his investigation. And he's like, "I've seen this symbol before, but I have no idea what it is, and like I'm like very curious about it, and I need to figure out what's going on." And so then he ends up going to the church, and he's looking through all of Darius's old stuff, and he's like having we get a lot of flashbacks, him and Darius doing things. If I remember correctly, the character who played Darius was not originally supposed to die in this episode, but the actor died like in real life. So then so Hugh had to like come in and be a part of this or something like that. I think he wasn't like, he was going to get like kidnapped, and then they were going to rescue him, but then like he didn't. So then Hugh got kidnapped instead. I don't remember exactly everything. I just remember reading something about it like years ago. But anyway, to the purpose of this, we get a lot of flashbacks in this episode of Darius and Duncan doing stuff. And a lot of them are the scenes we've already seen, because we can't get new scenes because the guy who played Darius is dead. So, and like, that's why we don't see we see a scene of him just like hanging out in the church. And then we see all the past scenes with Duncan are scenes we've already seen, like them playing chess, them chit-chatting about this and that and whatnot. And finally, Duncan finds this old Germanic book, and he's looking through it, and he's like, "Fuck!" And so then, meanwhile, Tessa's out doing stuff, and she runs into this like really creepy dude, right? And we find out that this guy's like the main antagonist. I don't know if we get his name in this episode, if I remember correctly, because this guy ends up being like a repeat antagonist. His name's like Horton Hears a Hugh or something like that. I'm sure I'll get it eventually. Anyway, so he says some creepy shit to her, and then she comes back and talks to Duncan about it. And then he's super concerned. And then we get some more fighting. Like, he goes and fights some more dudes, and then he goes to, like, this, in front of, like, the Palace of Versailles or something. That's not what it is, because I've been there, and it's like, No, maybe it is a palace. Anyway, it's some big looking palace, and then he gets into like a brawl with all these dudes, and they're like multiple, and they're like one's grabbing him, and they're kind of like stabbing him and stuff, and it like Richie just like rides in with his motorcycle and like takes a few out and like punches a dude out, and then all these people in like the palace like come out and they're like, the fuck is going on here? And so then they just like walk away nonchalant. Like Richie just leaves his motorcycle, or I guess stolen. I don't know. He just leaves like the motorcycle on the ground, and him and Duncan are just like do, and all the guys that were fighting just like walk off in the other direction, and it was like, what the fuck? Like I was, I was like, okay. Anyway, that was pretty funny. So then, let's see. Duncan does some more kind of investigating, and he does some more like Metal Gear Solid stuff where he like dresses up and like hides out, and he finds one of these guys and like beats him up and like threatens him, and then he like runs off, and then the guy like he like wakes up from Duncan like knocking him out, and he gets back in his car, and Duncan follows him to like their hideout. And meanwhile, we find out that Hugh's still alive. Oh, wow. Because they're going to, like, guillotine him for some reason. So they just cut off his head. And then we get, like, some rant by this guy about how, like, they're abominations or something, and how they all need to die, and something about, like, not being dominated. And then Duncan shows up and starts killing the shit out of these dudes with, like, a crossbow, and then, like, hitting them up the head and, like, stabbing him with a sword. And then it's just him and that guy, and they're, like, running around. And Duncan's been, like, tased and, like, beat up, and, like, he's not doing super great. Otherwise, he'd be beating the shit out of this guy. And he's talking about... And both of them mention, like him and Hugh mentioned, like a waste, like the quickening. You're wasting the quickening or something. And the guy keeps talking about how like they're not to be like. Oh yeah. So in the book, I'm sorry, I totally missed this. In the book, he finds out there's like this group that is like aware of the immortals, and they're like keeping kind of like eyes on them. And somehow these guys are involved in this group. So there's like a group of humans that are like, it's almost like the Hunters in like the World of Darkness games, right? Like, so somebody is aware of all the vampires and there are gargoyles in the original Vampire the Masquerade. But the fairy, someone aware of all this stuff, right? So you can play the hunters who like hunt all these evil creatures. So that's like these guys, it seems, right? Because he's reading about like knowing about these immortals and how they want to be like gods and their powers and all this stuff and yada 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 yada. And so something to do with that. Anyway, so this guy, after Duncan's able to like fight through him, and he's about to like get him, but then another guy grabs him, and then he beats the shit out of that guy, and then he the whole time like dudes are just like popping up. like out of nowhere, and then he beats a bunch of them, and then finally he releases Hugh, and the Horton guy like skedaddles out of there, and they're like they saved each other, but they weren't able to save them. And then they chit chat for a minute, and then we get this like ending scene for the whole season where him and Richie and Hugh are just like standing on the back of the barge while it's like going, and they're like taking his ashes, I think. I don't know if they have ashes in him, but anyway, they're like doing like a memorial service for him at the back of this barge. It's like kind of really sad about stuff. And yeah, that wraps up the episode, and that wraps up the season. So that's season 1. So we're going to follow this up with season 2, which is going to come, I don't know, it depends on what else I got going on in my life, but either next week or the week after. But yeah, that was season 1 of Highlander. It's excellent. Highly recommended. And it only gets better going forward. Like every good show, like the first season, it's like, okay, that was pretty good. And then it's like, the next season is like, wow, that blew that out of the waters. And so Highlander continues to be excellent going forward. So I'm super excited to watch this shit again and have a great time. I used to own like the entire like box set of like all 6 seasons. So now I just got it like saved on my server, and I'm watching it on my phone. Anyway, go ahead, like, share, subscribe, comment, and I will catch you guys later. Bye.